Nightflyers by George R.R. Martin.
When Jesus of Nazareth hung dying on his cross, the Volcran passed within a light year of his agony, headed outward. When the fire wars raged on earth, the Volcran sailed near old Poseidon, where the seas were still unnamed and unfished. By the time the star drive had transformed the federated nations of Earth into the Federal Empire, the Volcran had moved into the fringes of Hrangan space. The Hrangans never knew it. Like us, they were children of the small, bright worlds that circled their scattered suns, with little interest and less knowledge of the things that moved in the gulfs between. War flamed for 1,000 years, and the Volcran passed through it, unknowing and untouched, safe in a place where no fires could ever burn. Afterward, the Federal Empire was shattered and gone, and the Hrangans vanished in the dark of the collapse. But it was no darker for the Volcran. When Claranomus took his survey ship out from Avalon, the Volcran came within 10 light years of him. Claranomus found many things, but he did not find the Volcran. Not then, did he? And not on his return to Avalon, a lifetime later. When I was a child of 3, Claranomus was dust, as distant and dead as Jesus of Nazareth, and the Volcran passed close to Daron. That season, all the Cray sensitives grew strange and sat staring at the stars with luminous, flickering eyes. When I was grown, the Volcran had sailed beyond Tara, past the range of even the Cray, still heading outward. And now I am old, and the Volcran will soon pierce the Tempter's veil, where it hangs like a black mist between the stars. And we follow. Through the dark gulfs where no one goes, through the emptiness, through the silence that goes on and on, my Nightflyer and I give chase. From the hour the Nightflyer slipped into Star Drive, Royd Eris watched his passengers. 9 riders had boarded at the orbital docks above Avalon, 5 women and 4 men, each an Academy scholar, their backgrounds as diverse as their fields of study. Yet to Royd, they dressed alike, looked alike, even sounded alike. On Avalon, most cosmopolitan of worlds, they had become as one in their quest for knowledge. The Nightflyer was a trader, not a passenger vessel. It offered 1 double cabin, 1 closet-sized single. The other academicians rigged sleep webs in the 4 great cargo holds, some in close confinement with the instruments and computer systems they had packed on board. When restive, they could wander 2 short corridors, one leading from the drive room and the main airlock up past the cabins to a well-appointed lounge, library, kitchen, the other looping down to the cargo holds. Ultimately, it did not matter where they wandered. Even in the sanitary stations, Royd had eyes and ears. And always and everywhere, Royd watched. Concepts like a right of privacy did not concern him, but he knew they might concern his passengers if they knew of his activities. He made certain that they did not. Royd's own quarters, 3 spacious chambers forward of the passenger lounge, were sealed and inviolate. He never left them. To his riders, he was a disembodied voice over the communicators that sometimes called them for long conversations, and a holographic specter that joined them for meals in the lounge. His ghost was a lithe, pale-eyed young man with white hair who dressed in filmy pastel clothing 20 years out of date, and it had the disconcerting habit of looking past the person Royd was addressing, or in the wrong direction altogether. But after a few days, the academicians grew accustomed to it. The holograph walked only in the lounge in any event. But Royd, secretly, silently, lived everywhere, and ferreted out all of their little secrets. The cyberneticist talked to her computers, and seemed to prefer their company to that of humans. The xenobiologist was surly, argumentative, and a solitary drinker. The 2 linguists, lovers in public, seldom had sex and snapped bitterly at each other in private. The Psy-Psych was a hypochondriac, given to black depressions which worsened in the close confines of the Nightflyer. Royd watched them work, eat, sleep, copulate. He listened untiringly to their talk. Within a week, the 9 of them no longer seemed the same to him at all. Each of them was strange and unique, he had concluded. By the time the Nightflyer had been under drive for 2 weeks, 2 of the passengers had come to engage even more of his attention. He neglected none of them, watched all, but now specially he focused on Karoli de Brannon and Melantha Jurel. "Most of all, I want to know the why of them," Caroli de Brannon told him one false night the second week out from Avalon. Royd's luminescent ghost sat close to de Brannon in the darkened lounge, watching him drink bittersweet chocolate. The others were all asleep. Night and day are meaningless on a starship, but the Nightflyer kept the usual cycles, and most of the passengers followed them. Only Caroli de Brannon, administrator and generalist, kept his own solitary time. "The if of them is important as well, Caroli," Royd replied, his soft voice coming from the communicator panels in the walls. "Can you be truly certain if these aliens of yours exist?" "I can be certain," Caroli de Brannon replied. "That is enough. If everyone else were certain as well, we would have a fleet of research ships instead of your little Nightflyer." He sipped at his chocolate and gave a satisfied sigh. Do you know the Nor-Toulouche, Royd?" The name was strange to him, but it took Royd only a moment to consult his library computer. An alien race on the other side of human space, past the Findi worlds and the Demouche, possibly legendary. De Brannon chuckled. "Your library is out of date. You must supplement it the next time you're on Avalon. Not legends, no. Real enough, though far away. We have little information about the Nor-Toulouche, but we are sure they exist, though you and I may never meet one. They were the start of it all." I was coding some information into the computers, a packet newly arrived from Dam Tulian after 20 standard years in transit. Part of it was Nor-Toulouche folklore. I had no idea how long it had taken to get to Dam Tulian or by what route it had come, but it was fascinating material. Did you know that my first degree was in xenomythology? "I did not," Royd said. "Please continue." The Volcrane story was among the Nor-Toulouche myths. It awed me. A race of sentients moving out from some mysterious origin in the core of the galaxy, sailing towards the galactic edge, and it was alleged, eventually bound for intergalactic space itself, meanwhile keeping always to the interstellar depths, no planetfalls, seldom coming within a light year of a star, and doing it all without a star drive, in ships moving only a fraction of the speed of light. That was the detail that obsessed me. Think how old they must be, those ships. "Old," Royd agreed. "Caroli, you said ships. More than one?" "Oh, yes, there are," de Brannon said. "According to the Nor-Toulouche, one or two appeared first on the innermost edges of their trading sphere, but others followed. Hundreds of them, each solitary, moving by itself, bound outward, always the same. For 15,000 standard years they moved between the Nor-Toulouche stars, and then they began to pass out from among them. The myth said that the last Volcrane ship was gone 3,000 years ago." 18,000 years, Royd said, adding, "Are your Nor-Toulouche that old?" De Brannon smiled. "Not as star travelers, no. According to their own histories, the Nor-Toulouche have only been civilized for about half that long. That stopped me for a while. It seemed to make the Volcrane story clearly a legend, a wonderful legend, true, but nothing more. Ultimately, however, I could not let it alone. In my spare time, I investigated, cross-checking with other alien cosmologies to see whether this particular myth was shared by any races other than the Nor-Toulouche. I thought perhaps I would get a thesis out of it. It was a fruitful line of inquiry. I was startled by what I found. Nothing from the Harangans or the Harangan slave races, but that made sense, you see. They were out from human space. The Volcrane would not reach them until after they had passed through our own sphere. When I looked in, however, the Volcrane story was everywhere. The Findi had it. The Demouche appeared to accept it as a literal truth. And the Demouche, you know, are the oldest race we've ever encountered. And there was a remarkably similar story told among the Gethzoids of Oth. I checked what little was known about the races said to flourish further in still, beyond even the Nor-Toulouche, and they had the Volcrane story too. "The legend of the legends," Royd suggested. The Spectre's wide mouth turned up in a smile. Exactly, de Brannon agreed. At that point, I called in the experts, specialists from the Institute for the Study of Non-Human Intelligence. We researched for 2 years. It was all there, in the files in the libraries at the Academy. No one had ever looked before or bothered to put it together. The Volcrane have been moving through the man realm for most of human history, since before the dawn of spaceflight, while we twist the fabric of space itself to cheat relativity. They have been sailing their great ships right through the heart of our alleged civilization, past our most populous worlds, at stately, slow sublight speeds, bound for the fringe and the dark between the galaxies. Marvelous, Royd, marvelous. Marvelous, Royd agreed. Caroli DeBrannon set down his chocolate cup and leaned forward eagerly towards Royd's projection, but his hand passed through empty light when he tried to grasp his companion by the forearm. He seemed disconcerted for a moment before he began to laugh at himself. Ah, my Volcrin. I grow over-enthused, Royd. I am so close now. They have preyed on my mind for a dozen years, and within a month I will have them. Then, if only I can open communication, if only my people can reach them, then at last I will know the why of it. The ghost of Royd Eris, master of the Nightflyer, smiled for him and looked on through calm, unseeing eyes. Passengers soon grow restless on a starship under drive, sooner on one as small and spare as the Nightflyer. Late in the second week, the speculation began. Royd heard it all.
Who is this Royd Eris, really?
The xenobiologist complained one night when four of them were playing cards.
Why doesn't he come out? What's the purpose of keeping himself sealed off from the rest of us?
Ask him, the linguist suggested. No one did. When he was not talking to Caroli DeBrannon, Royd watched Melantha Jurl. She was good to watch. Young, healthy, active, Melantha Jurl had a vibrancy about her that the others could not touch. She was big, in every way, a head taller than anyone else on board, large-framed, large-breasted, long-legged, strong, muscles moving fluidly beneath shiny, coal-black skin. Her appetites were big as well. She ate twice as much as any of her colleagues, drank heavily without ever seeming drunk, exercised for hours every day on equipment she had brought with her and set up in one of the cargo holds. By the third week out, she had sexed with all four of the men on board and two of the other women. Even in bed, she was always active, exhausting most of her partners. Royd watched her with consuming interest. "I am an improved model," she told him once as she worked out on her parallel bars, sweat glistening on her bare skin, her long black hair confined in a net. "Improved?" Royd said. He could not send his holographic ghost down to the holds, but Melantha had summoned him with the communicator to talk while she exercised, not knowing he would have been there anyway. She paused in her routine, holding her body aloft with the strength of her arms. "Altered, Captain," she said. She had taken to calling him that. "Born on Prometheus among an elite. Child of two genetic wizards. Improved, Captain. I require twice the energy you do, but I use it all. A more efficient metabolism, a stronger and more durable body, an expected lifespan half again the normal humans. My people have made some terrible mistakes when they try to radically redesign the lessers, but the small improvements they do well." She resumed her exercises, moving quickly and easily, silent until she had finished. Then, breathing heavily, she crossed her arms and cocked her head and grinned. "Now you know my life story, Captain. Unless you care to hear the part about my defection to Avalon, my extraordinary work in non-human anthropology, and my tumultuous and passionate love life. Do you?" "Perhaps some other time," Royd said politely. "Good," Melantha Jurl replied. She snatched up a towel and began to dry the sweat from her body. "I'd rather hear your life story anyway. Among my modest attributes is an insatiable curiosity. Who are you, Captain? Really?" "One as improved as you," Royd replied, "should certainly be able to guess." Melantha laughed and tossed her towel at the communicator grill. By that time, all of them were guessing, when they did not think Royd was listening. He enjoyed the rumors. "He talks to us, but he can't be seen," the cyberneticist said. "This ship is uncrewed, seemingly all automated except for him. Why not entirely automated, then? I'd wager Royd Eris is a fairly sophisticated computer system, perhaps an artificial intelligence. Even a modest program can carry on a blind conversation indistinguishable from a human's." The telepath was a frail young thing, nervous, sensitive, with limp flaxen hair and watery blue eyes. He sought out Caroli DeBrannon in his cabin, the cramped single, for a private conversation. "I feel it," he said excitedly. "Something is wrong, Caroli. Something is very wrong. I'm beginning to get frightened." DeBrannon was startled. "Frightened? I don't understand, my friend. What is there for you to fear?" The young man shook his head. "I don't know. I don't know. Yet it's there. I feel it, Caroli. I'm picking up something. You know I'm good. I am. That's why you picked me. Class 1, tested. And I tell you, I'm afraid. I sense it. Something dangerous. Something volatile. And alien." My Volcran? D'Branin said. No, impossible. We're in drive. They're light years away. The telepath's laugh was desperate. I'm not that good, Caroli. I've heard your Cray story, but I'm only a human. No, this is close. On the ship. One of us? Maybe, the telepath said. I can't sort it out. D'Branin sighed and put a fatherly hand on the young man's shoulder. I thank you for coming to me, but I cannot act unless you have something more definite. This feeling of yours, could it be that you were just tired? We have all of us been under strain. Inactivity can be taxing. This is real, the telepath insisted, but he left peacefully. Afterward, D'Branin went to the Psy-Psych, who was lying in her sleep web surrounded by medicines, complaining bitterly of aches. Interesting, she said when D'Branin told her. I felt something too, a sense of threat, very vague, diffuse. I thought it was me, the confinement, the boredom, the way I feel. My moods betray me at times. Did he say anything more specific? No. I'll make an effort to move around. Read him, read the others, see what I can pick up. Although if this is real, he should know it first. He's a 1, I'm only a 3. D'Branin nodded, reassured. Later, when the rest had gone to sleep, he made some chocolate and talked to Royd through the false night. But he never mentioned the telepath once.
Have you noticed the clothes on the holograph he sends us?
The xenobiologist said to the others.
A decade out of style at least. I don't think he really looks like that. What if he's deformed, sick, ashamed to be seen the way he really looks? Perhaps he has some disease. The slow plague can waste a person terribly, but it takes decades to kill, and there are other contagions, manthrax and the new leprosy and Langerman's disease. Could it be that Royd's self-imposed quarantine is just that, a quarantine? Think about it.
In the 5th week out, Melantha Juro pushed her pawn to the 6th rank, and Royd saw it was unstoppable and resigned. It was his 8th straight defeat at her hands in as many days. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the lounge, the chessmen spread out before her on a view screen, its receiver dark. Laughing, she swept them away. Don't feel bad, Royd, she told him. I'm an improved model, always 3 moves ahead. I should tie in my computer, he replied. You'd never know. His holographic ghost materialized suddenly, standing in front of the view screen, and smiled at her. I'd know within 3 moves, Melantha Juro said. Try it. She stood up and walked right through his projection on her way to the kitchen, where she found herself a bulb of beer. When are you going to break down and let me behind your wall for a visit, Captain? She asked, talking up to a communicator grill. She refused to treat his ghost as real. Don't you get lonely there? Sexually frustrated? Claustrophobic? I've flown the Nightflyer all my life, Melantha, Royd said. His projection, ignored, winked out. If I were subject to claustrophobia, sexual frustration, or loneliness, such a life would have been impossible. Surely that should be obvious to you, being as improved a model as you are. She took a squeeze of her beer and laughed her mellow musical laugh at him. I'll solve you yet, Captain, she warned. Fine, he said. Meanwhile, tell me some more lies about your life.
Have you ever heard of Jupiter?
The xenotech demanded of the others. She was drunk, lolling in her sleep web in the cargo hold. Something to do with Earth, one of the linguists said. The same myth system originated both names, I believe.
Jupiter,
the xenotech announced loudly,
is a gas giant in the same solar system as old Earth. Didn't know that, did you? They were on the verge of exploring it when the star drive was discovered, way back. After that, nobody bothered with gas giants. Just slip into drive and find the habitable worlds. Settle them. Ignore the comets and the rocks and the gas giants. There's another star just a few light years away, and it has more habitable planets. But there were people who thought those Jupiters might have life, you know. Do you see?
The xenobiologist looked annoyed.
If there is intelligent life on the gas giants, it shows no interest in leaving them, he snapped. All of the sentient species we have met up to now have originated on worlds similar to Earth, and most of them are oxygen breathers, unless you suggest that the Volcran are from a gas giant.
The xenotech pushed herself up to a sitting position and smiled conspiratorially.
Not the Volcran, she said. Royd Eris. Crack that forward bulkhead in the lounge and watch the methane and ammonia come smoking out. Shh.
Her hand made a sinuous waving motion through the air, and she convulsed with giddy laughter.
I dampened him,
The Psi-Psych reported to Caroli de Brannon during the 6th week.
Cyanine 4. It will blunt his receptivity for several days, and I have more if he needs it.
De Brannon wore a stricken look.
We talked several times, he and I. I could see that he was becoming ever more fearful, but he could never tell me the why of it. Did you absolutely have to shut him off?
The Psi-Psych shrugged.
He was edging into the irrational. You should never have taken a Class 1 telepath, de Brannon. Too unstable.
We must communicate with an alien race. I remind you that is no easy task. The Volcran are perhaps more alien than any sentients we have yet encountered. Because of that, we needed Class 1 skills.
Glib, she said. But you might have no working skills at all, given the condition of your Class 1. Half the time he's catatonic and half the time crazy with fear. He insists that we're all in real physical danger, but he doesn't know why or from what. The worst of it is, I can't tell if he's really sensing something or simply having an acute attack of paranoia. He certainly displays some classic paranoid symptoms. Among other things, he believes he's being watched. Perhaps his condition is completely unrelated to us, the Volcran, and his talent. I can't be sure at this point in time.
What of your own talent? De Brannon said. You are an empath, are you not?
Don't tell me my job, she said sharply. I sexed with him last week. You don't get more proximity or better rapport for esping than that. Even under those conditions, I couldn't be sure of anything. His mind is a chaos, and his fear is so rank it stank up the sheets. I don't read anything from the others either, besides the ordinary tensions and frustrations. But I'm only a 3, so that doesn't mean much. My abilities are limited. You know I haven't been feeling well, de Brannon. I can barely breathe on this ship. My head throbs. Ought to stay in bed.
Yes, of course, de Brannon said hastily. I did not mean to criticize. You have been doing all you can under difficult circumstances. Yet I must ask, is it vital he be dampened? Is there no other way? Royd will take us out of drive soon, and we will make contact with the Volcran. We will need him.
The Psi-Psych rubbed her temple wearily.
My other option was an injection of Esperon. It would have opened him up completely, tripled his psionic receptivity for a few hours. Then, hopefully, he could home in this danger he's feeling. Exorcise it if it's false, deal with it if it's real. But Cyanine 4 is a lot safer. The physical side effects of Esperon are debilitating, and emotionally, I don't think he's stable enough to deal with that kind of power. The cyanine should give us something. If his paranoia continues to persist, I'll know it has nothing to do with his telepathy.
And if it does not persist? Caroli de Brannon said.
She smiled wickedly.
Then we'll know that he really was picking up some sort of threat, won't we?
False night came, and Royd's wraith materialized while Caroli de Brannon sat brooding over his chocolate.
Caroli,
the apparition said.
Would it be possible to tie in the computer your team brought on board with my shipboard system? Those Volcran stories fascinate me, and I'd like to be able to study them at my leisure.
Certainly, de Brannon replied in an offhand, distracted manner. It is time we got our system up and running in any case. Soon now we'll be dropping out of drive.
Soon,
Royd agreed.
Approximately 70 hours from now.
At dinner the following day, Royd's projection did not appear. The academicians ate uneasily, expecting their host to materialize at any moment, take his accustomed place, and join in the mealtime conversation. Their expectations were still unfilled when the after-dinner pots of chocolate and spiced tea and coffee were set on the table before them. "Our captain seems to be occupied," Melantha Gerl observed, leaning back in her chair and swirling a snifter of brandy.
We will be shifting out of drive soon, Caroli de Brannon said. There are preparations to make.
Some of the others looked at one another. All 9 of them were present, although the young telepath seemed lost in his own head. The xenobiologist broke the silence.
He doesn't eat. He's a damned holograph. What does it matter if he misses a meal? Maybe it's just as well. Caroli, a lot of us have been getting uneasy about Royd. What do you know about this mystery man, anyway?
De Brannon looked at him with wide, puzzled eyes.
No, my friend,
he said, leaning forward to refill his cup with the thick, bittersweet chocolate.
What is there to know?
Surely you've noticed that he never comes out to play with us,
the female linguist said dryly.
Before you engaged his ship, did anyone remark on this quirk of his? I'd like to know the answer to that, too, her partner said. A lot of traffic comes and goes through Avalon. How did you come to choose Eris? What were you told about him?
De Brannon hesitated.
Told about him? Very little, I must admit. I spoke to a few port officials and charter companies, but none of them were acquainted with Royd. He had not traded out of Avalon originally, you see.
Where is he from? The linguists demanded in unison. They looked at each other, and the woman continued. We've listened to him. He has no discernible accent, no idiosyncrasies of speech to betray his origins. Tell us, where did this Nightflyer come from?
I don't know, actually, DeBrannon admitted, hesitating. I never thought to ask him about it.
The members of his research team glanced at each other incredulously.
You never thought to ask?
The Xenotech said.
How did you select this ship, then?
It was available. The Administrative Council approved my project and assigned me personnel, but they could not spare an Academy ship. There were budgetary constraints as well.
All eyes were on him.
What DeBrannon is saying,
the Psi-Psych interrupted,
is that the Academy was pleased with his studies in xenomyth, with the discovery of the Volcrin legend, but less than enthusiastic about his plan to prove the Volcrin real. So they gave him a small budget to keep him happy and productive, assuming that this little mission would be fruitless, and they assigned him workers who wouldn't be missed back on Avalon.
She looked around at each person.
Except for DeBrannon, she said. Not a one of us is a first-rate scholar.
Well, you can speak for yourself, Malantha Jurl said. I volunteered for this mission.
I won't argue the point,
the Psi-Psych said.
The crux is that the choice of the Nightflyer is no large enigma. You engaged the cheapest charter you could find, didn't you, DeBrannon?
Some of the available ships would not even consider my proposition, DeBrannon said. The sound of it is odd, we must admit, and many shipmasters seem to have a superstitious fear of dropping out of drive in interstellar space without a planet near. Of those who agreed to the conditions, Royd Eris offered the best terms, and he was able to leave at once.
And we had to leave at once, said the female linguist. Otherwise the Volcrin might get away. They've only been passing through this region for 10,000 years, give or take a few thousand, she said sarcastically.
Someone laughed. DeBrannon was nonplussed.
Friends, no doubt I could have postponed departure. I admit I was eager to meet my Volcrin, to ask them the questions that have haunted me, to discover the why of them. But I must also admit that a delay would have been no great hardship. But why? Royd is a gracious host, a skilled pilot. He has treated us well.
He has made himself a cipher,
someone said.
What is he hiding?
Another voice demanded. Malantha Jurl laughed. When all eyes had moved to her, she grinned and shook her head. Captain Royd is perfect. A strange man for a strange mission. Don't any of you love a mystery? Here we are flying light years to intercept a hypothetical alien starship from the core of the galaxy that has been outward bound for longer than humanity has been having wars, and all of you are upset because you can't count the warts on Royd's nose. She leaned across the table to refill her brandy snifter. My mother was right, she said lightly. Normals are subnormal.
Malantha is correct, Caroli DeBrannon said quietly. Royd's foibles and neuroses are his business, if he does not impose them on us.
It makes me uncomfortable,
someone complained weakly.
For all we know, Caroli, said the Xenotech, we might be traveling with a criminal or an alien.
Jupiter, someone muttered. The Xenotech flushed red, and there was a sniggering around the long table. But the young, pale-haired telepath looked up suddenly and stared at them all with wild, nervous eyes.
An alien,
he said. The Psi-Psych swore.
The drug is wearing off, she said quickly to DeBrannon. I'll have to go back to my room to get some more.
All of the others looked baffled. DeBrannon had kept his telepath's condition a careful secret.
What drug?
The Xenotech demanded.
What's going on here?
Danger, the telepath muttered. He turned to the cyberneticist sitting next to him and grasped her forearm in a trembling hand.
We're in danger, I tell you. I'm reading it. Something alien. And it means us ill.
The Psi-Psych rose.
He's not well, she announced to the others. I've been dampening him with cyanide, trying to hold his delusions in check. I'll get some more.
She started toward the door. Wait, Malantha Jurl said. Not cyanide. Try Esperon.
Don't tell me my job, woman.
Sorry, Malantha said. She gave a modest shrug. I'm one step ahead of you, though. Esperon might exercise his delusions, no?
Yes, but...
And it might let him focus on this threat he claims to detect, correct?
I know the characteristics of Esperon,
the Psi-Psych said testily. Melantha smiled over the rim of her brandy glass. I'm sure you do, she said. Now listen to me. All of you are anxious about Royd, it seems. You can't stand not knowing what he's concealing about himself. You suspect him of being a criminal. Fears like that won't help us work together as a team. Let's end them. Easy enough, she pointed. Here sits a Class 1 telepath. Boost his power with Esperon, and he'll be able to recite our captain's life history to us until we're all suitably bored with it. Meanwhile, he'll also be vanquishing his personal demons. He's watching us, the telepath said in a low, urgent voice.
Caroli,
the xenobiologist said.
this has gone too far. Several of us are nervous, and this boy is terrified. I think we all need an end to the mystery of Royd Eris. Melantha is right.
DeBrannon was troubled.
We have no right.
We have the need, the cyberneticist said. DeBrannon's eyes met those of the Psi-Psych, and he sighed.
Do it, he said. Get him the Esperon.
He's going to kill me!
The telepath screamed and leapt to his feet. When the cyberneticist tried to calm him with a hand on his arm, he seized a cup of coffee and threw it square in her face. It took 3 of them to hold him down. Hurry, one commanded as the youth struggled. The Psi-Psych shuddered and quickly left the lounge. Royd was watching. When the Psi-Psych returned, they lifted the telepath to the table and forced him down, pulling aside his hair to bare the arteries in his neck. Royd's ghost materialized in its empty chair at the foot of the long dinner table.
Stop that.
It said calmly.
There is no need.
The Psi-Psych froze in the act of slipping an ampule of Esperon into her injection gun, and the Xenotech startled visibly and released one of the telepath's arms. But the captive did not pull free. He lay on the table, breathing heavily, too frightened to move, his pale blue eyes fixed glassily on Royd's projection. Melantha Jurl lifted her brandy glass in salute. Boo, she said. You've missed dinner, Captain.
Royd, said Caroli to Brannon. I am sorry.
The ghost stared unseeing at the far wall.
Release him,
said the voice from the communicators.
I will tell you my great secret, if my privacy intimidates you so.
He has been watching us,
the male linguist said.
Tell then,
the Xenotech said suspiciously.
What are you?
I liked your guess about the gas giants,
Royd said.
Sadly, the truth is less dramatic. I am an ordinary Homo sapien in late middle age. 68 standard if you require precision. The holograph you see before you was the real Royd Eris, although some years ago. I am older now.
Oh, the cyberneticist's face was red where the coffee had scalded her. Then why the secrecy?
I will begin with my mother. The Nightflyer was her ship originally, custom built to her design in the New Home space yards. My mother was a free trader, a notably successful one. She made a fortune through a willingness to accept the unusual consignment, fly off the major trade routes, take her cargo a month or a year or 2 years beyond where it was customarily transferred. Such practices are riskier, but more profitable than flying the mail runs. My mother did not worry about how often she and her crews returned home. Her ships were her home. She seldom visited the same world twice if she could avoid it.
Adventurous, Melantha said.
No,
said Royd.
Sociopathic. My mother did not like people, you see. Not at all. Her one great dream was to free herself from the necessity of crew. When she grew rich enough, she had it done. The Nightflyer was the result. After she boarded it at New Home, she never touched a human being again or walked the planet's surface. She did all her business from the compartments that are now mine. She was insane, but she did have an interesting life even after that. The world she saw, Caroli, the things she might have told you, your heart would break. She destroyed most of her records, however, for fear that other people might get some use or pleasure from her experience after her death. She was like that.
And you?
The Xenotech said.
I should not call her my mother,
Royd continued.
I am her cross-sex clone. After 30 years of flying this ship alone, she was bored. I was to be her companion and lover. She could shape me to be a perfect diversion. She had no patience with children, however, and no desire to raise me herself. As an embryo, I was placed in a nurturant tank. The computer was my teacher. I was to be released when I had attained the age of puberty, at which time she guessed I would be fit company. Her death, a few months after the cloning, ruined the plan. She had programmed the ship for such an eventuality, however. It dropped out of drive and shut down, drifted in interstellar space for 11 years while the computer made a human being out of me. That was how I inherited the Nightflyer. When I was freed, it took me some years to puzzle out the operation of the ship and my own origins.
Fascinating, said de Brannon.
Yes, said the female linguist, but it doesn't explain why you keep yourself in isolation. Ah, but it does, Melantha Gerald said. Captain, perhaps you should explain further for the less improved models.
My mother hated planets,
Royd said.
She hated stinks and dirt and bacteria, the irregularity of the weather, the sight of other people. She engineered for us a flawless environment, as sterile as she could possibly make it. She disliked gravity as well. She was accustomed to weightlessness and preferred it. These were the conditions under which I was born and raised. My body has no natural immunities to anything. Contact with any of you would probably kill me and would certainly make me very sick. My muscles are feeble, atrophied. The gravity the Nightflyer is now generating is for your comfort, not mine. To me, it is agony. At the moment, I am seated in a floating chair that supports my weight. I still hurt, and my internal organs may be suffering damage. It is one reason why I do not often take on passengers.
You share your mother's opinion of the run of humanity, then? The Psy-Psych said.
I do not. I like people. I accept what I am, but I did not choose it. I experience human life in the only way I can, vicariously, through the infrequent passengers I dare to carry. At those times, I drink in as much of their lives as I can.
If you kept your ship under weightlessness at all times, you could take on more riders, could you not?
Suggested the xenobiologist.
True,
Royd said politely. I have found, however, that most people choose not to travel with a captain who does not use his gravity grid. Prolonged freefall makes them ill and uncomfortable. I could also mingle with my guests, I know, if I kept to my chair and wore a sealed environment suit. I have done so. I find it lessens my participation instead of increasing it. I become a freak, a maimed thing, one who must be treated differently and kept at a distance. I prefer isolation. As often as I dare, I study the aliens I take on as riders.
Aliens?
The Xenotech said in a confused voice.
You are all aliens to me,
Royd answered. Silence then filled the Nightflyers' lounge.
I am sorry this had to happen, my friend,
Caroli de Brannon said to the ghost.
Sorry,
the Psy-Psych said. She frowned and pushed the ampule of Esperon into the injection chamber.
Well, it's glib enough, but is it the truth? We still have no proof, just a new bedtime story. The holograph could have claimed it was a creature from Jupiter, a computer, or a diseased war criminal just as easily.
She took 2 quick steps forward to where the young telepath still lay on the table.
He still needs treatment, and we still need confirmation. I don't care to live with all this anxiety when we can end it all now.
Her hand pushed the unresisting head to one side. She found the artery and pressed the gun to it.
No,
the voice from the communicator said sternly.
Stop. I order it. This is my ship. Stop.
The gun hissed loudly, and there was a red mark when she lifted it from the telepath's neck. He raised himself to a half-sitting position, supported by his elbows, and the Psy-Psych moved close to him.
Now,
she said in her best professional tones,
focus on Royd. You can do it. We all know how good you are. Wait just a moment. The Esperon will open it all up for you.
His pale blue eyes were clouded.
Not close enough,
he muttered.
I'm one, tested. Good, you know I'm good. But I've got to be close.
He trembled. She put an arm around him, stroked him, coaxed him.
The Esperon will give you range, she said. Feel it. Feel yourself grow stronger. Can you feel it? Everything's getting clear, isn't it?
Her voice was a reassuring drone.
Remember the danger now. Remember. Go find it. Look beyond the wall. Tell us about it. Tell us about Royd. Was he telling the truth? Tell us. You're good. We all know that. You can tell us.
The phrases were almost an incantation. He shrugged off her support and sat upright by himself. "I can feel it," he said. His eyes were suddenly clearer. "Something... My head hurts. I'm afraid." "Don't be afraid," the Psi-Psych said. "The Esperon won't make your head hurt. It just makes you better. Nothing to fear." She stroked his brow. "Tell us what you see." The telepath looked at Royd's ghost with terrified little boy eyes, and his tongue flicked across his lower lip. "Oh, he's..." Then his skull exploded. It was 3 hours later when the survivors met again to talk. In the hysteria and confusion of the aftermath, Melantha Jurl had taken charge. She gave orders, pushing her brandy aside and snapping out commands with the ease of one born to it. And the others seemed to find a numbing solace in doing as they were told. 3 of them fetched a sheet and wrapped the headless body of the young telepath within and shoved it through the drive-room airlock at the end of the ship. 2 others, on Melantha's order, found water and cloth and began to clean up the lounge. They did not get far. Mopping the blood from the tabletop, the cyberneticist suddenly began to retch violently. Caroli de Brannon, who had sat still and shocked since it happened, woke and took the blood-soaked rag from her hand and led her away back to his cabin. Melantha Jurl was helping the Psi-Psych, who had been standing very close to the telepath when he died. A sliver of bone had penetrated her cheek just below her right eye. She was covered with blood and pieces of flesh and bone and brain, and she had gone into shock. Melantha removed the bone splinter, led her below, cleaned her, and put her to sleep with a shot of one of her own drugs. And at length, she got the rest of them together in the largest of the cargo holds, where 3 of them slept. 7 of the surviving 8 attended. The Psi-Psych was still asleep, but the cyberneticist seemed to have recovered. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her features pale and drawn, waiting for Melantha to begin. It was Caroli de Brannon who spoke first, however.
"I do not understand," he said. "I do not understand what has happened. What could—"
"Royd killed him, is all," the Xenotech said bitterly. "His secret was endangered, so he just blew him apart."
"I cannot believe that," Caroli de Brannon said, anguished. "I cannot. Royd and I, we have talked many a night when the rest of you were sleeping. He is gentle, inquisitive, sensitive, a dreamer. He understands about the Volcran. He would not do such a thing."
"His holograph certainly winked out quick enough when it happened," the female linguist said. "And you'll notice he hasn't had much to say since." "The rest of you haven't been usually talkative either," Melantha Jurl said. "I don't know what to think, but my impulse is to side with Caroli. We have no proof that the captain was responsible for what happened." The Xenotech made a loud, rude noise. "Proof?" "In fact," Melantha continued unperturbed, "I'm not even sure anyone is responsible. Nothing happened until he was given the Esperon. Could the drug be at fault? Hell of a side effect," the female linguist muttered. The xenobiologist frowned.
This is not my field, but I know Esperon is an extremely potent drug with severe physical effects as well as psionic. The instrument of death was probably his own talent, augmented by the drug. Besides boosting his principal power, his telepathic sensitivity, Esperon would also tend to bring out other psi talents that might have been latent in him.
"Such as?" someone demanded.
Biocontrol, telekinesis.
Melantha Jurl was way ahead of him. Increase the pressure inside his skull sharply by rushing all the blood in his body to his brain. Decrease the air pressure around his head simultaneously, using teak to induce a short-lived vacuum. Think about it. They thought about it, and none of them liked it.
"It could have been self-induced,"
Caroli de Brannon said. "Or a stronger talent could have turned his power against him," the Xenotech said stubbornly.
"No human telepath has talent on that order, to seize control of someone else, body and mind and soul, even for an instant."
"Exactly," the Xenotech said. "No human telepath." "Gas giant people?" The cyberneticist's tone was mocking. The Xenotech stared her down. "I could talk about Cray sensitives or Githyanki soul sucks, name a half-dozen others off the top of my head, but I don't need to. I'll only name one. A Hrangan mind." That was a disquieting thought. All of them fell silent and moved uneasily, thinking of the vast, inimicable power of a Hrangan mind, hidden in the command chambers of the Nightflyer, until Melantha Jurl broke the spell. "That is ridiculous," she said. "Think of what you're saying, if that isn't too much to ask. You're supposed to be xenologists, the lot of you, experts in alien languages, psychology, biology, technology. You don't act the part. We warred with old Hranga for 1,000 years, but we never communicated successfully with a Hrangan mind. If Royd Eris is a Hrangan, they've certainly improved their conversational skills in the century since the collapse." The xenotech flushed. "You're right," she mumbled. "I'm jumpy."
"Friends," Caroli de Brannon said, "we must not panic or grow hysterical. A terrible thing has happened. One of our colleagues is dead, and we do not know why. Until we do, we can only go on. This is no time for rash actions against the innocent. Perhaps, when we return to Avalon, an investigation will tell us what happened. The body is safe, is it not?"
"We cycled it through the airlock into the drive room," said the male linguist. "Vacuum in there. It'll keep."
"And it can be examined on our return," de Brannon said, satisfied.
"That return should be immediate," the xenotech said. "Tell Eris to turn this ship around."
De Brannon looked stricken.
"But the Volcran! A week more and we will know them, if my figures are correct. To return would take us 6 weeks. Surely it is worth 1 week additional to know that they exist."
The xenotech was stubborn.
"A man is dead. Before he died, he talked about aliens and danger. Maybe we're in danger, too. Maybe these Volcran are the cause. Maybe they're more potent than even a Hrangan mind. Do you care to risk it? And for what? Your sources may be fictional or exaggerated or wrong. Your interpretations and computations may be incorrect, or they may have changed course. The Volcran may not even be within light years of where we'll drop out."
"Ah," Melantha Jurl said. "I understand. Then we shouldn't go on because they won't be there, and besides, they might be dangerous." De Brannon smiled, and the female linguist laughed.
"Not funny,"
said the xenotech, but she argued no more. "No," Melantha continued. "Any danger we are in will not increase significantly in the time it will take us to drop out of drive and look about for Volcran. We would have to drop out anyway to reprogram. Besides, we have come a long way for these Volcran, and I admit to being curious." She looked at each of them in turn, but none of them disagreed. "We continue then."
"And what do we do with Royd?" de Brannon asked.
"Treat the captain as before, if we can," Melantha said decisively. "Open lines to him and talk. He's probably as shocked and dismayed by what happened as we are, and possibly fearful that we might blame him, try to hurt him, something like that. So we reassure him. I'll do it if no one else wants to talk to him." There were no volunteers. "All right, but the rest of you had better try to act normally."
"Also," said de Brannon, "we must continue with our preparations. Our sensory instruments must be ready for deployment as soon as we shift out of drive and re-enter normal space. Our computer must be functioning."
"It's up and running," the cyberneticist said quietly. "I finished this morning, as you requested." She had a thoughtful look in her eyes, but de Brannon did not notice. He turned to the linguists and began discussing some of the preliminaries he expected from them, and in a short time the talk had turned to the Volcran, and little by little the fear drained out of the group. Royd, listening, was glad. She returned to the lounge alone. Someone had turned out the lights. "Captain," she said, and he appeared to her, pale, glowing softly, with eyes that did not really see. His clothes, filmy and out of date, were all shades of white and faded blue. "Did you hear, Captain?" His voice over the communicator betrayed a faint hint of surprise.
"Yes. I hear and see everything on my Nightflyer, Melantha. Not only in the lounge. Not only when the communicators and view screens are on. How long have you known?"
"Known?" She laughed. "Since you praised the gas giant solution to the Roydian mystery."
I was under stress. I've never made a mistake before."
"I believe you, Captain," she said. "No matter. I'm the improved model, remember? I'd guessed weeks ago." For a time, Royd said nothing. Then,
"When do you begin to reassure me?"
"I'm doing so right now. Don't you feel reassured yet?" The apparition gave a ghostly shrug.
"I am pleased that you and Caroli do not think I murdered that man."
She smiled. Her eyes were growing accustomed to the room. By the faint light of the holograph, she could see the table where it had happened. Dark stains across its top. Blood. She heard a faint dripping and shivered. "I don't like it in here."
If you would like to leave, I can be with you wherever you go.
No, she said. I'll stay. Royd, if I asked you to, would you shut off your eyes and ears throughout the ship, except for the lounge? It would make the others feel better, I'm sure.
They don't know.
They will. You made that remark about gas giants in everyone's hearing. Some of them have probably figured it out by now.
If I told you I had cut myself off, you would have no way of knowing whether it was the truth.
I could trust you, Melantha said. Silence. The Spectre looked thoughtful.
As you wish.
Royd's voice said finally.
Everything off. Now I see and hear only in here.
I believe you.
Did you believe my story?
Royd asked. Ah, she said. A strange and wondrous story, Captain. If it's a lie, I'll swap lies with you any time. You do it well. If it's true, then you are a strange and wondrous man.
It's true,
the ghost said quietly.
Melantha?
His voice hesitated. Yes?
I watched you copulating.
She smiled. Ah, she said. I'm good at it.
I wouldn't know,
Royd said.
You're good to watch.
Silence. She tried not to hear the dripping. Yes, she said after a long hesitation.
Yes. What?
Yes, Royd, I would probably sex with you if it were possible.
How did you know what I was thinking?
I'm an improved model, she said. And no, I'm not a telepath. It wasn't so difficult to figure out. I told you I'm 3 moves ahead of you. Royd considered that for a long time.
I believe I'm reassured,
he said at last. Good, said Melantha Jurl. Now, reassure me.
Of what?
What happened in here, really? Royd said nothing. I think you know something, Melantha said. You gave up your secret to stop us from injecting him with Esperon. Even after your secret was forfeit, you ordered us not to go ahead. Why?
Esperon is a dangerous drug,
Royd said. More than that, Captain, Melantha said. What killed him?
I didn't.
One of us? The Volcran? Royd said nothing. Is there an alien aboard your ship, Captain? She asked. Is that it? Silence. Are we in danger? Am I in danger, Captain? I'm not afraid. Does that make me a fool?
I like people,
Royd said at last.
When I can stand it, I like to have passengers. I watch them, yes. It's not so terrible. I like you and Caroli especially. You have nothing to fear. I won't let anything happen to you.
What might happen? She asked. Royd said nothing. And what about the others, Royd? Are you taking care of them, too? Or only Caroli and me? No reply. You're not very talkative tonight, Melantha observed.
I'm under strain,
his voice replied.
Go to bed, Melantha Jurl. We've talked long enough.
All right, Captain, she said. She smiled at his ghost and lifted her hand. His own rose to meet it. Warm, dark flesh and pale radiance brushed, melded, were one. Melantha Jurl turned to go. It was not until she was out in the corridor, safe in the light once more, that she began to tremble. False midnight. The talks had broken up, the nightmares had faded, and the academicians were lost in sleep. Even Caroli de Brannon slept, his appetite for chocolate quelled by his memories of the lounge. In the darkness of the largest cargo hold, 3 sleep webs hung, sleepers snoring softly in 2. The cyberneticist lay awake, thinking in the 3rd. Finally she rose, dropped lightly to the floor, pulled on her jumpsuit and boots, and shook the xenotech from her slumber. Come, she whispered, beckoning. They stole off into the corridor, leaving Melantha Jurl to her dreams. What the hell? The xenotech muttered when they were safely beyond the door. She was half-dressed, disarrayed, unhappy. There's a way to find out if Royd's story was true, the cyberneticist said carefully. Melantha won't like it, though. Are you game to try? What? The other asked. Her face betrayed her interest. Come, the cyberneticist said. One of the 3 lesser cargo holds had been converted into a computer room. They entered quietly, all empty. The system was up, but dormant. Currents of light ran silkily down crystalline channels in the data grids, meeting, joining, splitting apart again, rivers of wan, multi-hued radiance crisscrossing a black landscape. The chamber was dim, the only noise a low buzz at the edge of human hearing, until the cyberneticist moved through it, touching keys, tripping switches, directing the silent luminescent currents. Slowly, the machine woke. "What are you doing?" the xenotech said. "Caroli told me to tie in our system with the ship," the cyberneticist replied as she worked. "I was told Royd wanted to study the Volcran data. Fine, I did it. Do you understand what that means?" Now the xenotech was eager. "The two systems are tied together." "Exactly. So Royd can find out about the Volcran, and we can find out about Royd." She frowned. "I wish I knew more about the Nightflyers' hardware, but I think I can feel my way through. This is a pretty sophisticated system de Brannon requisitioned." "Can you take over?" the xenotech asked excitedly. "Take over?" The cyberneticist sounded puzzled. "You've been drinking again." "No, I'm serious. Use your system to break into the ship's control, overwhelm Eris, countermand his orders, make the Nightflyer respond to us down here." "Maybe," the cyberneticist said doubtfully, slowly. "I could try, but why do that?" "Just in case. We don't have to use the capacity, just so we have it if an emergency arises." The cyberneticist shrugged. "Emergencies and gas giants. I only want to put my mind at rest about Royd." She moved over to a readout panel where a half-dozen meter-square view screens curved around a console and brought one of them to life. Long fingers brushed across holographic keys that appeared and disappeared as she touched them, the keyboard changing shape even as she used it. Characters began to flow across the view screen, red flickerings encased in glassy black depths. The cyberneticist watched and finally froze them. "Here," she said. "Here's my answer about the hardware. You can dismiss your takeover idea unless those gas giant people of yours are going to help. The Nightflyer's bigger and smarter than our little system here. Makes sense when you stop to think about it. Ship's all automated except for Royd." She whistled and coaxed her search program with soft words of encouragement. "It looks as though there is a Royd, though. Configurations are all wrong for a robot ship. Damn, I would have bet anything." The characters began to flow again, the cyberneticist watching the figures as they drifted by. "Here's life support specs. Might tell us something." A finger jabbed and the screen froze once more. "Nothing unusual," the xenotech said in disappointment. "Standard waste disposal. Water recycling, food processor with protein and vitamin supplements in stores." She began to whistle. "Tanks of Rennie's moss and neograss to eat up the CO2. Oxygen cycle then. No methane or ammonia. Sorry about that." "Go sex with a computer." The cyberneticist smiled. "Ever tried it?" Her fingers moved again. "What else should I look for? Give me some ideas." "Check the specs for nurturant tanks, cloning equipment, that sort of thing. Find Royd's life history, his mother's. Get a readout on the business they've done, all this alleged trading." Her voice grew excited, and she took the cyberneticist by the shoulder. "A log! A ship's log! There's got to be a log! Find it! You must!" "All right." She whistled, happy, one with her system, riding the data winds, in control, curious. The readout screen turned a bright red and began to blink at her, but she only smiled. "Security," she said, her fingers a blur. As suddenly as it had come, the blinking red field was gone. Nothing like slipping past another system's security, like slipping onto a man. Down the corridor, an alarm sounded, a whooping call. "Damn," the cyberneticist said. "That'll wake everyone." She glanced up when the xenotech's fingers dug painfully into her shoulder, squeezing, hurting. A gray steel panel slid almost silently across the access to the corridor. "What?" the cyberneticist said. "That's an emergency air seal," the xenotech said in a dead voice. She knew starships. "It closes when they're about to load or unload cargo in vacuum." Their eyes went to the huge curving outer airlock above their heads. The inner lock was almost completely open, and as they watched, it clicked into place, and the seal on the outer door cracked, and now was open half a meter, sliding, and beyond was twisted nothingness so bright it burned the eyes. "Oh," the cyberneticist said. She had stopped whistling. Alarms were hooting everywhere. The passengers began to stir. Melantha Jurel leapt from her sleep web and darted into the corridor, nude, concerned, alert. Caroli de Brannon sat up drowsily, The Psy-Psych muttered fitfully in her drug-induced sleep. The xenobiologist cried out in alarm. Far away, metal crunched and tore, and a violent shudder ran through the ship, throwing the linguists out of their sleep webs, knocking Melantha from her feet. In the command quarters of the Nightflyer was a spherical room with featureless white walls, a lesser sphere, control console, suspended in its center. The walls were always blank when the ship was in drive. The warped and glaring underside of space-time was painful to behold. But now, darkness woke in the room, a holoscape coming to life, cold black and stars everywhere, points of icy, unwinking brilliance, no up and no down, and no direction. The floating control sphere the only feature in the simulated sea of night. The Nightflyer had shifted out of drive. Melantha Jurl found her feet again and thumbed on a communicator. The alarms were still hooting and it was hard to hear.
"Captain,"
she shouted.
"what's happening?"
I don't know,
Royd's voice replied.
I'm trying to find out. Wait here. Gather the others to you.
She did as he had said, and only when they were all together in the corridor did she slip back to her web to don some clothing. She found only 6 of them. The Psy-Psych was still unconscious and could not be roused, and they had to carry her. And the Xenotech and Cyberneticist were missing. The rest looked uneasily at the seal that blocked cargo hold 3. The communicator came back to life as the alarm died.
We have returned to normal space,
Royd's voice said.
but the ship is damaged. Hold 3, your computer room, was breached while we were under drive. It was ripped apart by the flux. The computer automatically dropped us out of drive, or the drive forces might have torn my entire ship apart.
Royd,
DeBrannon said.
2 of my team are...
It appears that your computer was in use when the hold was breached,
Royd said carefully.
We can only assume that they are dead. I cannot be sure. At Melantha's request, I have deactivated most of my eyes and ears, retaining only the lounge inputs. I do not know what happened. But this is a small ship, Caroli, and if they are not with you, we must assume the worst.
He paused briefly.
If it is any consolation, they died quickly and painlessly.
The 2 linguists exchanged a long, meaningful look. The xenobiologist's face was red and angry, and he started to say something. Melantha Jurl slipped her hand over his mouth firmly.
"Do we know how it happened, Captain?"
she asked.
Yes?
He said reluctantly. The xenobiologist had taken the hint, and Melantha took away her hand to let him breathe. "Royd?" she prompted.
It sounds insane, Melantha,
His voice replied.
but it appears your colleagues opened the hold's loading lock. I doubt that they did so deliberately, of course. They were apparently using the system interface to gain entry to the Nightflyers' data storage and controls.
"I see," Melantha said. "A terrible tragedy."
Yes,
Royd agreed.
perhaps more terrible than you think. I have yet to assess the damage to my ship.
"We should not keep you, Captain, if you have duties to perform," Melantha said. "All of us are shocked, and it is difficult to talk now. Investigate the condition of your ship, and we'll continue our discussion in the morning, all right?"
Yes,
Royd said. Melantha thumbed the communicator plate. Now, officially, the device was off. Royd could not hear them. Caroli DeBrannon shook his large, grizzled head. The linguists sat close to one another, hands touching. The Psy-Psych slept. Only the xenobiologist met her gaze.
"Do you believe him?"
He snapped abruptly. "I don't know," Melantha Jurl said. "But I do know that the other 3 cargo holds can all be flushed, just as Hold 3 was. I'm moving my sleep web into a cabin. I suggest those who are living in Hold 2 do the same." "Good idea," the female linguist said. "We can crowd in. It won't be comfortable, but I don't think I'd sleep the sleep of angels in the holds anymore."
"We should also take our suits out of storage in 4 and keep them close at hand,"
her partner suggested. "If you wish," Melantha said. "It's possible that all the locks might pop open simultaneously. Royd can't fault us for taking precautions." She flashed a grim smile. "After today, we've earned the right to act irrationally."
"This is no time for your damn jokes, Melantha,"
the xenobiologist said, fury in his voice.
3 dead, a 4th maybe deranged or comatose, the rest of us endangered.
"We still have no idea what is happening," she pointed out.
"Royd Eris is killing us!"
He shouted, pounding his fist into an open palm to emphasize his point.
I don't know who or what he is, and I don't know if that story he gave us is true, and I don't care. Maybe he's a Harangan mind, or the avenging angel of the Volcran, or the second coming of Jesus Christ. What the hell difference does it make? He's killing us!
You realize, Melantha said gently, that we cannot actually know whether the good captain has turned off his inputs down here. He could be watching and listening to us right now. He isn't, of course. He told me he wouldn't, and I believe him. But we have only his word on that. Now you don't appear to trust Royd. If that's so, you can hardly put any faith in his promises. It follows that from your point of view, it might not be wise to say the things that you're saying. She smiled slyly. The xenobiologist was silent.
The computer is gone, then, Caroli de Brannon said in a low voice before Melantha could resume.
She nodded. I'm afraid so. He rose unsteadily to his feet.
I have a small unit in my cabin, he said. A wrist model. Perhaps it will suffice. I must get the figures from Royd, learn where we have dropped out. The Volcran...
He shuffled off down the corridor and disappeared into his cabin. Think how distraught he'd be if all of us were dead, the female linguist said bitterly. Then he'd have no one to help him look for Volcran. Let him go, Melantha said. He is as hurt as any of us, maybe more so. He wears it differently. His obsessions are his defense. What's our defense? Ah, said Melantha. Patience, maybe. All of the dead were trying to breach Royd's secret when they died. We haven't tried. Here we sit discussing their deaths. Don't you find that suspicious? Very, Melantha Gerald said. I even have a method of testing my suspicions. One of us can make yet another attempt to find out whether our captain told us the truth. If he or she dies, we'll know. She stood up abruptly. Forgive me, however, if I'm not the one who tries. But don't let me stop you if you have the urge. I'll note the results with interest. Until then, I'm going to move out of the cargo area and get some sleep. Arrogant bitch, the male linguist observed almost conversationally after Melantha had left. Do you think he can hear us? The xenobiologist whispered quietly. Every pithy word, the female linguist said, rising. They all stood up. Let's move our things and put her, she jerked a thumb at the Psy-Psych, back to bed. Her partner nodded. Aren't we going to do anything? The xenobiologist said. Make plans? Defenses? The linguist gave him a withering look and pulled her companion off in the other direction. Melantha? Caroli? She woke quickly, alert at the mere whisper of her name, and sat up in the narrow bunk. Next to her, Caroli de Brannon moaned softly and rolled over, yawning. Royd? She asked. Is it morning now?
Yes,
replied the voice from the walls.
We are drifting in interstellar space 3 light years from the nearest star, however. In such a context, does morning have meaning?
Melantha laughed. Debate it with Caroli when he wakes up enough to listen. Royd, you said drifting. How bad?
Serious,
he said.
But not dangerous. Hold 3 is a complete ruin, hanging from my ship like a broken metal eggshell, but the damage was confined. The drives themselves are intact, and the Nightflyers' computers did not seem to suffer from your machine's destruction. I feared they might. Electronic death trauma.
De Brannon said, Eh? Royd? Melantha patted him. I'll tell you later, Caroli, she said. Royd, you sound serious. Is there more?
I am worried about our return flight, Melantha, he said. When I take the Nightflyer back into drive, the flux will be playing directly on portions of the ship that were never engineered to withstand it. The air seal across Hold 3 is a particular concern. I've run some projections, and I don't know if it can take the stress. If it bursts, my whole ship will split apart in the middle. My engines will go shunting off by themselves, and the rest...
I see. Is there anything we can do?
Yes. The exposed areas would be easy enough to reinforce. The outer hull is armored to withstand the warping forces, of course. We could mount it in place, a crude shield, but it would suffice. Large portions of the hull were torn loose when the locks opened, but they are still out there, floating within a kilometer or 2, and could be used.
At some point, Caroli de Brannon had come awake.
My team has 4 vacuum sleds. We can retrieve these pieces for you.
Fine, Caroli. But that is not my primary concern. My ship is self-repairing within certain limits, but this exceeds those limits. I will have to do this myself.
You, de Brannon said. Friend, you said, that is your muscles, your weakness. Cannot we help with this?
I am only a cripple in a gravity field, Caroli.
Royd said.
Weightless, I am in my element, and I will be killing our gravity grid momentarily to try to gather my own strength for the repair work. No, you misunderstand. I am capable of the work. I have the tools and my own heavy-duty sled.
I think I know what you are concerned about, Melantha said.
I'm glad,
Royd said.
Perhaps then you can answer my question. If I emerge from the safety of my chambers, can you keep your friends from killing me?
Caroli de Brannon was shocked.
Royd, we are scholars. We are not soldiers or criminals. We are human. How can you think that we would threaten you?
Human,
Royd repeated.
but alien to me, suspicious of me. Give me no false assurances, Caroli.
The administrator sputtered. Melantha took his hand and bid him quiet. Royd, she said, I won't lie to you. You'd be in some danger. But I'd hope that by coming out, you'd make the rest of them joyously happy. They'd be able to see that you told the truth, wouldn't they?
They would,
Royd said.
But would it be enough to offset their suspicions? They believe I killed your friends, do they not?
Some, perhaps. Half believe it, half fear it. They are frightened, Captain. I am frightened.
No more than I.
I would be less frightened if I knew what did happen. Do you know? Silence. Royd, if...
I tried to stop the Esperon injection,
he said.
I might have saved the other two if I had seen them, heard them, known what they were about. But you made me turn off my monitors, Melantha. I cannot help what I cannot see.
Hesitation.
I would feel safer if I could turn them back on. I am blind and deaf. It is frustrating. I cannot help if I am blind and deaf.
Turn them on then, Melantha said suddenly. I was wrong. I did not understand. Now I do, though.
Understand what? Caroli said.
You do not understand,
Royd said.
You do not. Don't pretend that you do, Melantha Gerald. Don't!
The calm voice from the communicator was shrill with emotion.
What? Caroli said. Melantha, I do not understand.
Her eyes were thoughtful. Neither do I, she said. Neither do I, Caroli. She kissed him lightly. Royd, she resumed, it seems to me you must make this repair regardless of what promises we can give you. You won't risk your ship by slipping back into drive in your present condition. The only other option is to drift here until we all die. What choice do we have?
I have a choice,
Royd said with deadly seriousness.
I could kill all of you, if that were the only way to save my ship.
You could try, Melantha said.
Let's have no more talk of death, de Brannon said.
You are right, Caroli,
Royd said.
I do not wish to kill any of you, but I must be protected.
You will be, Melantha said. Caroli can set the others to chasing your hull fragments. I'll never leave your side. I'll assist you. The work will be done 3 times as fast. Royd was polite.
In my experience, most planet-bound are clumsy and easily tired in weightlessness. It would be more efficient if I worked alone.
It would not, she replied. I remind you that I'm the improved model, Captain. Good in freefall as well as in bed. I'll help.
As you will. In a few moments, I shall depower the gravity grid. Caroli, go and prepare your people. Unship your sled and suit up. I will exit Nightflyer in 3 hours after I have recovered from the pains of your gravity. I want all of you outside the ship when I leave.
It was as though some vast animal had taken a bite out of the universe. Melantha Jurl waited on her sled close by the Nightflyer and looked at stars. It was not so very different out here in the depths of interstellar space. The stars were cold, frozen points of light, unwinking, austere, more chill and uncaring somehow than the same suns made to dance and twinkle by an atmosphere. Only the absence of a landmark primary reminded her of where she was. In the places between, where men did not stop, where the Volcran sail ships impossibly ancient. She tried to pick out Avalon's sun, but she did not know where to search. The configurations were strange to her, and she had no idea of how she was oriented. Behind her, before her, above, all around, the starfield stretched endlessly. She glanced down, beneath her sled in the Nightflyer, expecting still more alien stars, and the bite hit her with an almost physical force. Melantha fought off a wave of vertigo. She was suspended above a pit, a yawning chasm in the universe, black, starless. vast, empty. She remembered then, the Tempter's Veil. Just a cloud of dark gas, nothing really, galactic pollution that obscured the light from the stars of the fringe. But this close at hand, it looked immense, terrifying. She had to break her gaze when she began to feel as if she were falling. It was a gulf between her and the frail, silver-white shell of the Nightflyer, a gulf about to swallow them. Melantha touched one of the controls on the sled's forked handle, swinging around so the veil was to her side instead of beneath her. That seemed to help somehow. She concentrated on the Nightflyer. It was the largest object in her universe, brightly lit, ungainly, 3 small eggs side by side, 2 larger spheres beneath, and at right angles, lengths of tube connecting it all. One of the eggs was shattered now, giving the craft an unbalanced cast. She could see the other sleds as they angled through the black, tracking the missing pieces of eggshell, grappling with them, bringing them back. The linguistic team worked together, as always, sharing a sled. The xenobiologist was alone. Caroli de Brannon had a silent passenger, the Psy-Psych, freshly drugged, asleep in the suit they had dressed her in. Royd had insisted that the ship be cleared completely, and it would have taken time and care to rouse the Psy-Psych to consciousness. This was the safer course. While her colleagues labored, Melantha Jurel waited for Royd Eris, talking to the others occasionally over the comlink. The 2 linguists, unaccustomed to weightlessness, were complaining a lot. Caroli tried to soothe them. The xenobiologist worked in silence, argued out. He had been vehement earlier in his opposition to going outside, but Melantha and Caroli had finally worn him down, and it seemed as if he had nothing more to say. Melantha now watched him flit across her field of vision, a stick figure in form-fitting black armor, standing stiff and erect at the controls of his sled. At last, the circular airlock atop the foremost of the Nightflyer's major spheres dilated, and Royd Eris emerged. She watched him approach, wondering what he would look like. She had so many different pictures. His genteel, cultured, too formal voice sometimes reminded her of the dark aristocrats of her native Prometheus, the wizards who toyed with human genes. At other times, his naivete made her think of him as an inexperienced youth. His ghost was a tired-looking, thin young man, and he was supposed to be considerably older than that pale shadow. But Melantha found it difficult to hear an old man talking when he spoke. Royd's sled was larger than theirs and of a different design, a long oval plate with 8-jointed grappling arms bristling from its underside like the legs of a metal spider, and the snout of a heavy-duty cutting laser mounted above. His suit was odd, too, more massive than the Academy work suits, with a bulge between its shoulder blades that was probably a power pack, and rakish radiant fins atop shoulders and helmet. But when he was finally near enough for Melantha to see his face, it was just a face. White, very white. That was the predominant impression she got. White hair cropped very short, a white stubble around the sharply chiseled lines of his jaw, almost invisible eyebrows, beneath which blue eyes moved restlessly. His skin was pale and unlined, scarcely touched by time. He looked wary, she thought, and perhaps a bit frightened. He stopped his sled close to hers, amid the twisted ruin that had been Cargo Hold 3, and surveyed the damage. The pieces of floating wreckage that once had been flesh and blood, glass, metal, plastic. Hard to distinguish now, all of them fused and burned and frozen together. "We have a good deal of work to do, Melantha," he said. "First, let's talk," she replied. She shifted her sled closer and reached out to him, but the distance was still too great, the width of the 2 vacuum sleds keeping them apart. Melantha backed off and turned herself over completely, so that Royd hung upside down in her world, and she upside down in his. Then she moved toward him again, positioning her sled directly over under his. Their gloved hands met, brushed, parted. Melantha adjusted her altitude. Their helmets touched. "I don't," Royd began to say uncertainly. "Turn off your comm," she commanded. "The sound will carry through the helmets." He blinked and used his tongue controls, and it was done. "Now we can talk," she said. "I do not like this, Melantha," he said. "This is too obvious. This is dangerous." "There's no other way," she said. "Royd, I do know." "Yes," he said. "I knew you did. 3 moves ahead, Melantha. I remember the way you play chess. You are safer if you feign ignorance, however." "I understand that, Captain. Other things I'm less sure about. Can we talk about it?" "No. Don't ask me to. Just do as I tell you. You are in danger, all of you, but I can protect you. The less you know, the better I can protect you." Through the transparent faceplates, his expression was grim. She stared into his upside-down eyes. "Your ship is killing us, Captain. That's my suspicion anyway, not you. It. Only that doesn't make sense. You command the Nightflyer. How can it act independently? And why? What motive? How is that psionic murder accomplished? It can't be the ship, yet it can't be anything else. Help me, Captain." He blinked. There was anguish behind his eyes. "I should never have accepted Caroli's charter. Not with a telepath among you. It was risky. But I wanted to see the Volcran." "You understand too much already, Melantha," Royd continued. "I can't tell you more. The ship is malfunctioning. That is all you need to know. It is not safe to push too hard. As long as I am at the controls, however, you and your colleagues are in small danger. Trust me." "Trust is a two-way bond," Melantha said steadily. Royd lifted his hand and pushed her away, then tongued his calm back to life.
"Enough gossip," he briskly announced. "We have repairs to make. Come, I want to see just how improved you are."
In the solitude of her helmet, Melantha Jurl swore softly. The xenobiologist watched Royd Eris emerge on his oversized work sled, watched Melantha Jurl move to him, watched as she turned over and pressed her faceplate to his. He could scarcely contain his rage. Somehow they were all in it together. Royd and Melantha, and possibly old DeBrannon as well, he thought sourly. She had protected him from the first, when they might have taken action together, stopped him, found out who or what he was. And now, 3 were dead, killed by the cipher in the misshapen spacesuit, and Melantha hung upside down, her face pressed to his like lovers kissing. He tongued off his calm and cursed. The others were out of sight, off chasing spinning wedges of half-slagged metal. Royd and Melantha were engrossed in each other, the ship abandoned and vulnerable. This was his chance. No wonder Eris had insisted that all of them precede him into the void. Outside, isolated from the controls of the Nightflyer, he was only a man, a weak one at that. Smiling a thin, hard smile, the xenobiologist brought his sled around in a wide circle and vanished into the gaping maw of the drive room. His lights flickered past the ring of nukes and sent long, bright streaks along the sides of the closed cylinders of the star drives, the huge engines that bent the stuff of space-time, encased in webs of metal and crystal. Everything was open to the vacuum. It was better that way. Atmosphere corroded and destroyed. He set the sled down, dismounted, moved to the airlock. This was the hardest part, he thought. The headless body of the young telepath was tethered loosely to a massive support strut, a grisly guardian by the door. The xenobiologist had to stare at it while he waited for the lock to cycle. Whenever he glanced away, somehow he would find his eyes creeping back to it. The body looked almost natural, as if it had never had a head. The xenobiologist tried to remember the young man's face, and failed. But then the locked doors slid open, and he gratefully pushed the thought away and entered. He was alone in the Nightflyer. A cautious man, he kept his suit on, though he collapsed the helmet and yanked loose the suddenly limp metallic fabric so it fell behind his back like a hood. He could snap it in place quickly enough if the need arose. In Cargo Hold 4, where they had stored their equipment, the xenobiologist found what he was looking for. A portable cutting laser, charged and ready. Low power, but it would do. Slow and clumsy in weightlessness, he pulled himself through the corridor into the darkened lounge. It was chilly inside, the air cold on his cheeks. He tried not to notice. He braced himself at the door and pushed off across the width of the room, sailing above the furniture, which was all safely bolted into place. As he drifted toward his objective, something wet and cold touched his face. It startled him, but it was gone before he could make out what it was. When it happened again, he snatched at it, caught it, and felt briefly sick. He had forgotten. No one had cleaned the lounge yet. The remains were still there, floating now, blood and flesh and bits of bone and brain, all around him. He reached the far wall, stopped himself with his arms, pulled himself down to where he wanted to go. The bulkhead, the wall. No doorway was visible, but the metal couldn't be very thick. Beyond was the control room, the computer access, safety, power. The xenobiologist did not think of himself as a vindictive man. He did not intend to harm Royd Eris. That judgment was not his to make. He would take control of the Nightflyer, warn Eris away, make certain the man stayed sealed in his suit. He would take them all back without any more mysteries, any more killings. The Academy arbiters could listen to the story and probe Eris and decide the right and wrong of it, guilt and innocence. What should be done? The cutting laser emitted a thin pencil of scarlet light. The xenobiologist smiled and applied it to the bulkhead. It was slow work, but he had patience. They would not have missed him, quiet as he'd been, and if they did, they would assume he was off sledding after some hunk of salvage. Eris's repairs would take hours, maybe days to finish. The bright blade of the laser smoked where it touched the metal. He applied himself diligently. Something moved on the periphery of his vision, just a little flicker, barely seen. A floating bit of brain, he thought, a sliver of bone, a bloody piece of flesh, hair still hanging from it. Horrible things, but nothing to worry about. He was a biologist. He was used to blood and brains and flesh. And worse. And worse. He had dissected many an alien in his day. Again, and the motion caught his eye, teased at it. Not wanting to, he found himself drawn to look. He could not look somehow, just as he had been unable to ignore the headless telepath in the airlock. He looked. It was an eye. The xenobiologist trembled, and the laser slipped sharply off to one side, so he had to wrestle with it to bring it back to the channel he was cutting. His heart raced. He tried to calm himself. Nothing to be frightened of. No one was home, and if Royd should return, well, he had the laser as a weapon, and he had his suit on if an airlock blew. He looked at the eye again, willing away his fear. It was just an eye. The eye of the young telepath, intact. Bloody but intact, the same watery blue eye the boy had when alive. Nothing supernatural. A piece of dead flesh, floating in the lounge amid other pieces of dead flesh. Someone should have cleaned up the lounge, he thought angrily. It was indecent to leave it like this. It was uncivilized. The eye did not move. The other grisly bits were drifting on the air currents that flowed across the room, but the eye was still, fixed on him, staring. He cursed himself and concentrated on the laser, on his cutting. He had burned an almost straight line up the bulkhead for about a meter. He began another at right angles. The eye watched dispassionately. The xenobiologist suddenly found he could not stand it. One hand released its grip on the laser, reached out, caught the eye, flung it across the room. The action made him lose balance. He tumbled backward, the laser slipping from his grasp, his arms flapping like the wings on some absurd heavy bird. Finally, he caught an edge of the table and stopped himself. The laser hung in the center of the room, still firing, turning slowly where it floated. That did not make sense. It should have ceased fire when he released it. A malfunction, he thought. Smoke rose from where the thin line of the laser traced a path across the carpet. With a shiver of fear, the xenobiologist realized that the laser was turning towards him. He raised himself, put both hands flat against the table, pushed off out of the way. The laser was turning more swiftly now. He slammed into a wall, grunted in pain, bounced off the floor, kicked. The laser was spinning quickly, chasing him. He soared, braced himself for a ricochet off the ceiling. The beam swung around, but not fast enough. He'd get it while it was still firing off in the other direction. He moved close, reached, and saw the eye. It hung just above the laser, staring. The xenobiologist made a small whimpering sound low in his throat, and his hand hesitated, not long, but long enough, and the scarlet beam came up and around. Its touch was a light, hot caress across his neck. It was more than an hour later before they missed him. Caroli de Brannon noticed his absence first, called for him over the comnet, and got no answer. He discussed it with the others. Royd Eris moved his sled back from the armor plate he had just mounted, and through his helmet, Melantha Gerald could see the lines around his mouth grow hard. His eyes were sharply alert. It was just then that the screaming began. A shrill bleat of pain and fear, followed by choked, anguished sobbing. They all heard it. It came over the comnet and filled their helmets.
"It's him,"
a woman's voice said, the linguist.
"He's hurt,"
her partner added.
"He's crying for help. Can't you hear it?" "Where?"
Someone started.
"The ship,"
the female linguist said.
"He must have returned to the ship."
Royd Eris said.
"No. I warned. We're going to go check,"
the linguist said. Her partner cut free the hull fragment they had been towing, and it spun away, tumbling. Their sled angled down towards the Nightflyer.
Stop,
Royd said.
I'll return to my chambers and check from there if you wish. Stay outside until I give you clearance. Go to hell,
The linguist snapped at him over the open circuit.
Royd, my friend, what can you mean?
Caroli de Brannon said. His sled was in motion too, hastening after the linguists, but he had been further out, and it was a long way back to the ship.
He is hurt, perhaps seriously. We must help.
No,
Royd said.
Caroli, stop. If your colleague went back to the ship alone, he is dead.
How do you know that?
The male linguist demanded.
Did you arrange it? Set traps?
Listen to me.
Royd continued.
You can't help him now. Only I could have helped him, and he did not listen to me. Trust me. Stop.
In the distance, de Brannon's sled slowed. The linguists did not.
We've listened to you too damn much, I'd say,
the woman said. She almost had to shout to be heard above the sobs and whimpers, the agonized sounds that filled their universe.
Melantha,
She said.
keep Eris right where he is. We'll go carefully, find out what is happening inside, but I don't want him getting back to his controls, understood?
Melantha Jurl hesitated. Sounds of terror and agony beat against her ears. It was hard to think. Royd swung his sled around to face her, and she could feel the weight of his stare.
Stop them,
He said.
Melantha, Caroli, order it. They do not know what they are doing.
His voice was edged with despair. In his face, Melantha found decision.
Go back inside quickly, Royd. Do what you can. I'm going to try to intercept them.
He nodded to her across the gulf, but Melantha was already in motion. Her sled backed clear of the work area, congested with hull fragments and other debris, then accelerated briskly as she raced toward the rear of the Nightflyer. But even as she approached, she knew it was too late. The linguists were too close, and already moving much faster than she was.
Don't!
She said, authority in her voice.
This ship isn't safe, damn it! Bitch!
Was all the answer she got. Caroli's sled pursued vainly.
Friends, you must stop. Please, I beg it of you. Let us talk this out together.
The unending whimpers were his only reply.
I am your superior,
He said.
I order you to wait outside. Do you hear me? I order it. I invoke the authority of the Academy. Please, my friends, please listen to me.
Melantha watched as the linguists vanished down the long tunnel of the drive room. A moment later, she halted her sled near the waiting black mouth, debating whether she should follow them into the Nightflyer. She might be able to catch them before the airlock opened. Royd's voice, hoarse counterpoint to the crying, answered her unvoiced question.
Stay, Melantha. Proceed no further.
She looked behind her. Royd's sled was approaching.
What are you doing?
She demanded.
Royd, use your own lock. You have to get back inside.
Melantha, he said calmly, I cannot. The ship will not respond to me. The control lock will not dilate. I don't want you or Caroli inside the ship until I can return to my controls.
Melantha Jurl looked down the shadowed barrel of the drive room, where the linguists had vanished.
What will...
Beg them to come back, Melantha. Plead with them. Perhaps there is still time, if they will listen to you.
She tried. Caroli de Brannon tried too. The crying, the moaning, the twisted symphony went on and on, but they could not raise the two linguists at all.
They've cut out their comm,
Melantha said furiously.
They don't want to listen to us, or that sound.
Royd's sled and Caroli de Brannon's reached her at the same time.
I do not understand.
Caroli said.
What is happening?
It is simple, Caroli.
Royd replied.
I am being kept outside until Mother is done with them.
The linguists left their vacuum sled next to the one the xenobiologist had abandoned and cycled through the airlock in unseemly haste, with hardly a glance for the grim doorman. Inside, they paused briefly to collapse their helmets. I can still hear him, the man said. The woman nodded. The sound is coming from the lounge. Hurry. They kicked and pulled their way down the corridor in less than a minute. The sounds grew steadily louder, nearer. He's in there, the woman said when they reached the chamber door. Yes, her partner said. But is he alone? We need a weapon. What if... Royd had to be lying. There is someone else on board. We need to defend ourselves. The woman would not wait. There are two of us, she said. Come on. With that, she launched herself through the doorway and into the lounge. It was dark inside. What little light there was spilled through the door from the corridor. Her eyes took a long moment to adjust. Where are you? She cried in confusion. The lounge seemed empty, but maybe it was only the light. Follow the sound, the man suggested. He stood in the door, glancing warily about for a moment, before he began to feel his way down a wall, groping with his hands. The woman, impatient, propelled herself across the room, searching. She brushed against a wall in the kitchen area, and that made her think of weapons. She knew where the utensils were stored. "Here," she said. "Here, I've got a knife. That should thrill you." She waved it and brushed against a floating bubble of blood as big as her fist. It burst and reformed into 100 small globules. "Oh, merciful God!" the man said in a voice thick with fear. "What?" she demanded. "Did you find him? Is he—" He was fumbling his way back towards the door, creeping along the wall the way he had come. "Get out of here," he warned. "Oh, hurry!" "Why?" She trembled despite herself. "I found the source," he said. "The screams, the crying. Come on!" "What?" he whimpered. "It was the grill. Oh, don't you see? It's coming from the communicator." He reached the door and sighed audibly, and he did not wait for her. He bolted down the corridor and was gone. She braced herself and positioned herself in order to follow him. The sound stopped, just like that, turned off. She kicked, floated toward the door, knife in hand. Something dark crawled from beneath the dinner table and rose to block her path. She saw it clearly for a moment, outlined in the light from the corridor. The xenobiologist, still in his vacuum suit, but with his helmet pulled off. He had something in his hands that he raised to point at her. It was a laser she saw, a simple cutting laser. She was moving straight toward him. She flailed and tried to stop herself, but she could not. When she got quite close, she saw that he had a second mouth below his chin, and it was grinning at her, and little droplets of blood flew from it, wetly as he moved. The man rushed down the corridor in a frenzy of fear, bruising himself as he smashed into walls. Panic and weightlessness made him clumsy. He kept glancing over his shoulder as he fled, hoping to see his lover coming after him, but terrified of what he might see in her stead. It took a long, long time for the airlock to open. As he waited, trembling, his pulse began to slow. He steadied himself with an effort. Once inside the chamber, with the inner door sealed between him and the lounge, he began to feel safe. Suddenly, he could barely remember why he had been so terrified. And he was ashamed. He had run, abandoned her. And for what? What had frightened him so? An empty lounge? Noises from a communicator? Why, that only meant the xenobiologist was alive somewhere else in the ship, in pain, spilling his agony into a comm unit. Resolute, he reached out and killed the cycle on the airlock, then reversed it. The air that had been partially sucked out came gusting back into the chamber. The man shook his head ruefully. He'd hear no end of this, he knew. She would never let him forget it. But at least he would return and apologize. That would count for something. As the inner door rolled back, he felt a brief flash of fear again, an instant of stark terror when he wondered what might have emerged from the lounge to wait for him in the corridors of the Nightflyer. He willed it away. When he stepped out, she was waiting for him. He could see neither anger nor disdain in her curiously calm features, but he pushed himself toward her and tried to frame a plea for forgiveness anyway. "I don't know why With languid grace, her hand came out from behind her back. The knife was in it. That was when he finally noticed the hole burned in her suit, just between her breasts.
Your mother?
Melantha Jurl said, incredulously as they hung helpless in the emptiness beyond the ship.
She can hear everything we say, Royd replied. But at this point, it no longer makes any difference. Your friend must have done something very foolish, very threatening. Now she is determined to kill you all.
She? What do you mean?
DeBrannon's voice was puzzled.
Royd, surely you do not tell us that your mother is still alive. You said she died even before you were born.
She did, Caroli,
Royd said.
I did not lie to you. No,
Melantha said.
I didn't think so. But you did not tell us the whole truth either.
Royd nodded.
Mother is dead, but her ghost still lives and animates my Nightflyer. My control is tenuous at best.
Royd,
DeBrannon said.
My Volcran are more real than any ghosts.
His voice chided gently.
I don't believe in ghosts either, Melantha Jurl said with a frown. Call it what you will then, Royd said. My term is as good as any. The reality is unchanged. My mother, or some part of my mother, lives in the Nightflyer, And she is killing you all as she has killed others before.
Royd, you do not make sense, de Brandon said.
Caroli, let the captain explain. Yes,
Royd said.
the Nightflyer is very, very advanced, you know. Automated, self-repairing, large. It had to be, if Mother were to be freed from the necessity of crew. It was built on New Home, you will recall. I have never been there, but I understand that New Home's technology is quite sophisticated. Avalon could not duplicate this ship, I suspect. There are few worlds that could. The point, Captain? The point. The point is the computers, Melantha. They had to be extraordinary. They are, believe me, they are. Crystal matrix cores, laser grid data retrieval, and other features. Are you telling us that the Nightflyer is an artificial intelligence? No,
Royd said.
not as I understand it, but it is something close. Mother had a capacity for personality impress built in. She filled the central crystal with her own memories, desires, quirks, her loves, and her hates. That was why she trusted the computer with my education, you see. She knew it would raise me as she herself would, had she the patience. She programmed it in certain other ways as well.
And you cannot deprogram, my friend?
Caroli asked. Royd's voice was despairing.
I have tried, Caroli, but I am a weak hand at systems work, and the programs are very complicated, the machines very sophisticated. At least 3 times I have eradicated her, only to have her surface once again. She is a phantom program, and I cannot track her. She comes and goes as she will, a ghost, do you see? Her memories and her personality are so intertwined with the programs that run the Nightflyer that I cannot get rid of her without wiping the entire system. But that would leave me helpless. I could never reprogram. And with the computers down, the entire ship would fail. Drives, life support, everything. I would have to leave the Nightflyer, and that would kill me.
You should have told us, my friend, Caroli de Brannon said. On Avalon, we have many cyberneticists, some very great minds. We might have aided you. We could have provided expert help.
Caroli, I have had expert help. Twice I have brought systems specialists on board. The first one told me what I have just told you, that it was impossible without wiping the programs completely. The second had trained on New Home. She thought she could help me. Mother killed her. You are still omitting something,
Melantha Jurl said.
I understand how your cybernetic ghost can open and close airlocks at will and arrange other accidents of that nature. But that first death, our telepath, how do you explain that? Ultimately, I must bear the guilt, Royd replied. My loneliness led me to a grievous error. I thought I could safeguard you, even with a telepath among you. I have carried other riders safely. I watch them constantly, warn them away from dangerous acts. If Mother attempts to interfere, I countermand her directly from the control room. That usually works. Not always. Usually. Before you, she had killed only 5 times, and the first 3 died when I was quite young. That was how I learned about her. That party included a telepath, too. I should have known better, Caroli. My hunger for life has doomed you all to death. I overestimated my own abilities and underestimated her fear of exposure. She strikes out when she is threatened, and telepaths are always a threat. They sense her, you see. A malign looming presence, they tell me. Something cool and hostile and inhuman.
Yes,
Caroli de Brannon said.
yes, that was what he said. An alien, he was certain of it.
No doubt she feels alien to a telepath used to the familiar contours of organic minds. Hers is not a human brain, after all. What it is, I cannot say. A complex of crystalline memories, a hellish network of interlocking programs, a meld of circuitry and spirit. Yes, I can understand why she might feel alien. You still haven't explained how a computer program could explode a man's skull,
Melantha said patiently.
Have you ever held a whisper jewel?
Royd Eris asked her.
Yes,
She replied. She had even owned one once, a dark blue crystal packed with the memories of a particularly satisfying bout of lovemaking. It had been esper-etched on Avalon, her feelings impressed onto the jewel, and for more than a year she had only to touch it to grow randy. It had finally faded, though, and afterwards she had lost it.
Then you know that psionic power can be stored,
Royd said.
The central core of my computer system is resonant crystal. I think Mother impressed it as she lay dying. Only an Esper can etch a whisper jewel,
Melantha said.
You never asked me the why of it, Caroli,
Royd said.
Nor you, Melantha. You never asked why Mother hated people so. She was born gifted, you see. On Avalon, she might have been a Class 1, tested and trained and honored, her talent nurtured and rewarded. I think she might have been very famous. She might have been stronger than a Class 1, but perhaps it is only after death that she acquired such power, linked as she is to the Nightflyer. The point is moot. She was not born on Avalon. On her birth world, her ability was seen as a curse, something alien and fearful. So they cured her of it. They used drugs and electroshock and hypno-training that made her violently ill whenever she tried to use her talent. She never lost her power, of course, only the ability to use it effectively, to control it with her conscious mind. It remained part of her, suppressed, erratic, a source of shame and pain. And half a decade of institutional cure almost drove her insane. No wonder she hated people. What was her talent? Telepathy? No. Oh, some rudimentary ability, perhaps. I have read that all psi talents have several latent abilities in addition to their one developed strength. But Mother could not read minds. She had some empathy, although her cure had twisted it curiously, so that the emotions she felt literally sickened her. But her major strength, the talent they took 5 years to shatter and destroy, was teak. Melantha Jurel swore. No wonder she hated gravity. Telekinesis under weightlessness is... Yes, Royd finished. Keeping the Nightflyer under gravity tortures me, but it limits Mother.
In the silence that followed that comment, each of them looked down the dark cylinder of the drive room. Caroli DeBrannon moved awkwardly on his sled.
They have not returned,
he said finally.
They are probably dead,
Royd said dispassionately.
What will we do, friend Royd? We must plan. We cannot wait here indefinitely.
The first question is, what can I do?
Royd Eris replied.
I have talked freely, you'll note. You deserve to know. We have passed the point where ignorance was a protection. Obviously, things have gone too far. There have been too many deaths, and you have been witness to all of them. Mother cannot allow you to return to Avalon alive. Ah,
said Melantha.
True. But what shall she do with you? Is your own status in doubt, Captain? The crux of the problem,
Royd admitted.
You are still 3 moves ahead, Melantha. I wonder if it will suffice. Your opponent is 4 ahead this game, and most of your pawns are already captured. I fear checkmate is imminent. Unless I can persuade my opponent's king to desert, no?
She could see Royd smile at her wanly.
She would probably kill me too, if I choose to side with you.
Caroli DeBrannon was slow to grasp the point.
But what else could you...
My sled has a laser. Yours do not. I could kill you both right now, and thereby earn my way into the Nightflyers' good graces.
Across the 3 meters that lay between their sleds, Melantha's eyes met Royd's. Her hands rested easily on the thruster controls.
You could try, Captain. Remember, the improved model isn't easy to kill. I would not kill you, Melantha Jurel,
Royd said seriously.
I have lived 68 standard years, and I have never lived at all. I am tired, and you tell grand, gorgeous lies. If we lose, we will all die together. If we win, well, I shall die anyway when they destroy the Nightflyer. Either that, or live as a freak in an orbital hospital. And I would prefer death. We will build you a new ship, Captain,
Melantha said.
Liar,
Royd replied, but his tone was cheerful.
No matter. I have not had much of a life anyway. Death does not frighten me. If we win, you must tell me about your Volcrin once again, Caroli. And you, Melantha, you must play chess with me once more. And... His voice trailed off. And sex with you?
She finished, smiling.
If you would,
he said quietly.
I have never touched, you know. Mother died before I was born. He shrugged. Well, Mother has heard all of this. Doubtless, she will listen carefully to any plans we might make, so there is no sense making them. There is no chance now that the control lock will admit me, since it is keyed directly into the ship's computer. So we must follow your colleagues through the drive room and enter through the manual lock, and take what chances we are given. If I can reach consoles and restore gravity, perhaps we...
He was interrupted by a low groan. For an instant, Melantha thought the Nightflyer was wailing at them again, and she was surprised that it was so stupid as to try the same tactic twice. Then the groan sounded a second time, and in the back of Caroli de Brannan's sled, the forgotten fourth survivor struggled against the bonds that held her down. De Brannan hastened to free her, and the Psy-Psych tried to rise to her feet and almost floated off the sled until he caught her hand and pulled her back.
Are you well?
He asked.
Can you hear me? Have you pain?
Imprisoned beneath a transparent faceplate, wide, frightened eyes flicked rapidly from Caroli to Melantha to Royd, and then to the broken Nightflyer. Melantha wondered whether the woman was insane and started to caution de Brannan when the Psy-Psych spoke suddenly.
The Fulcrin,
was all she said.
The Fulcrin. Oh, the Fulcrin.
Around the mouth of the drive room, the ring of nuclear engines took on a faint glow. Melantha Jurl heard Royd suck in his breath sharply. She gave the thruster controls of her sled a violent twist.
Hurry,
she said.
The Nightflyer's preparing to move.
A third of the way down the long barrel of the drive room, Royd pulled abreast of her, stiff and menacing in his black, bulky armor. Side by side, they sailed past the cylindrical star drives and the cyber webs. Ahead, dimly lit, was the main airlock and its ghastly sentinel.
When we reach the lock, jump over to my sled,
Royd said.
I want to stay armed and mounted, and the chamber is not large enough for 2 sleds.
Melantha Jurl risked a quick glance behind her.
Caroli,
she called.
Where are you?
I'm outside, Melantha.
The answer came.
I cannot come, my friend. Forgive me.
But we have to stay together,
she said.
No,
de Brannan's voice replied.
No, I could not risk it. Not when we are so close. It would be so tragic, so futile, Melantha, to come so close and fail. Death I do not mind, but I must see them first, finally, after all these years.
His voice was firm and calm. Royd Eris cut in.
Caroli, my mother is going to move the ship. Don't you understand? You will be left behind, lost.
I will wait,
de Brannan replied.
My Vulcan are coming, and I will wait for them.
Then there was no more time for conversation, for the airlock was almost upon them. Both sleds slowed and stopped, and Royd Eris reached out and began the cycle, while Melantha moved to the rear of the huge oval work sled. When the outer door moved aside, they glided through into the locked chamber.
When the inner door opens, it will begin,
Royd told her evenly.
Most of the permanent furnishings are either built in or welded or bolted into place, but the things that your team brought on board are not. Mother will use those things as weapons. And beware of doors, airlocks, any equipment tied into the Nightflyer's computer. Need I warn you not to unseal your suit? Hardly, she replied.
Royd lowered the sled a little, and its grapplers made a metallic sound as they touched against the chamber floor. The inner door opened, and Royd applied his thrusters. Inside, the linguists were waiting, swimming in a haze of blood. The man had been slit from crotch to throat, and his intestines moved like a nest of pale, angry snakes. The woman still held the knife. They swam closer with a grace they had never possessed in life. Royd lifted his foremost grapplers and smashed them to the side. The man caromed off a bulkhead, leaving a wide wet mark where he struck, and more of his guts came sliding out. The woman lost control of the knife. Royd accelerated past them, driving up the corridor through the cloud of blood.
I'll watch behind,
Melantha said, and she turned and put her back to his. Already, the 2 corpses were safely behind them. The knife was floating uselessly in the air. She started to tell Royd that they were all right, when the blade abruptly shifted and came after them, as if some invisible force had taken hold of it.
Swerve!
She shouted. The sled shot wildly to one side. The knife missed by a full meter and glanced ringingly off a bulkhead. But it did not drop. It came at them again. The lounge loomed ahead, dark.
The door is too narrow,
Royd said.
We will have to abandon the sled, Melantha.
Even as he spoke, they hit. He wedged the sled squarely into the doorframe, and the sudden impact jarred them loose. For a moment, Melantha floated clumsily in the corridor, trying to get her balance. The knife slashed at her, opening her suit and her shoulder. She felt sharp pain and the warm flush of bleeding.
Damn!
She shrieked. The knife came around again, spraying droplets of blood. Melantha's hand darted out and caught it. She muttered something under her breath and wrenched the blade free of the force that had been gripping it. Royd had regained the controls of his sled and seemed intent on some manipulation. Beyond, in the dimness of the lounge, Melantha saw a dark semi-human shape float into view. "Royd!" she warned. But as she did, the thing activated its laser. The pencil beam caught Royd square in the chest. He touched his own firing stud. The sled's heavy-duty laser cindered the xenobiologist's weapon and burned off his right arm and part of his chest. Its pulsing shaft hung in the air and smoked against the far bulkhead. Royd made some adjustments and began cutting a hole. "We'll be through in 5 minutes or less," he said curtly, without stopping or looking up. "Are you all right?" Melantha asked. "I'm uninjured," he replied. "My suit is better armored than yours, and his laser was a low-powered toy." Melantha turned her attention back to the corridor. The linguists were pulling themselves toward her, one on each side of the passage, to come at her from 2 directions at once. She flexed her muscles. Her shoulder throbbed where she had been cut. Otherwise, she felt strong, almost reckless. "The corpses are coming after us again," she told Royd. "I'm going to take them." "Is that wise?" he asked. "There are 2 of them." "I'm an improved model," Melantha said, "and they're dead." She kicked herself free of the sled and sailed toward the man. He raised his hands to block her. She slapped them aside, bent one arm back and heard it snap, and drove her knife deep into his throat before she realized what a useless gesture that was. The man continued to flail at her. His teeth snapped grotesquely. Melantha withdrew her blade, seized him, and with all her considerable strength, threw him bodily down the corridor. He tumbled, spinning wildly, and vanished into the haze of his own blood. Melantha then flew in the opposite direction. The woman's hands went around her from behind. Nails scrabbled against her faceplate until they began to bleed, leaving red streaks on the plastic. Melantha spun to face her attacker, grabbed a thrashing arm, and flung the woman down the passageway to crash into her struggling companion. "I'm through," Royd announced. She turned to see. A smoking meter-square opening had been cut through one side of the lounge. Royd killed the laser, gripped both sides of the doorframe, and pushed himself toward it. A piercing blast of sound drilled through her head. She doubled over in agony. Her tongue flicked out and clicked off the comm. Then there was blessed silence. In the lounge, it was raining. Kitchen utensils, glasses, and plates, pieces of human bodies, all lashed violently across the room and glanced harmlessly off Royd's armored form. Melantha, eager to follow, drew back helplessly. That rain of death would cut her to pieces in her lighter, thinner vacuum suit. Royd reached the far wall and vanished into the secret control section of the ship. She was alone. The Nightflyer lurched, and sudden acceleration provided a brief semblance of gravity. She was thrown to one side, her injured shoulder smashed painfully against the sled. All up and down the corridor, doors were opening. The linguists were moving toward her once again. The Nightflyer was a distant star sparked by its nuclear engines. Blackness and cold enveloped them, and below was the unending emptiness of the Tempter's Veil. But Caroli de Brannon did not feel afraid. He felt strangely transformed. The void was alive with promise.
"They are coming," he whispered.
"Even I, who have no psi at all, even I can feel it. The Cray story must be so. Even from light years off they can be sensed. Marvelous." The Psi-Psych seemed very small. "The Fulcrin," she muttered. "What good can they do us? I hurt. The ship is gone, de Brannon. My head aches." She made a small, frightened noise. "Oh, the boy said that just after I injected him. Before, you know. He said that his head hurt." "Quiet, my friend. Do not be afraid. I am here with you. Wait. Think only of what we shall witness. Think only of that." "I can sense them," the Psi-Psych said. De Brannon was eager. "Tell me then. We have the sled. We shall go to them. Direct me." "Yes," she agreed. "Yes. Oh, yes." Gravity returned. In a flicker, the universe became almost normal. Melantha fell to the deck, landed easily and rolled, and was on her feet, cat-quick. The objects that had been floating ominously through the open doors along the corridor all came clattering down. The blood was transformed from a fine mist to a slick covering on the corridor floor. The 2 corpses dropped heavily from the air and lay still. Royd spoke to her. His voice came from the communicator grills built into the walls, not over her suit comm. "I made it," he said. I noticed, she replied.
I'm at the main control console,
He continued.
I've restored the gravity with a manual override, and I'm cutting off as many computer functions as possible. We're still not safe, though. She will try to find a way around me. I'm countermanding her by sheer force, as it were. I cannot afford to overlook anything, and if my attention should lapse for even a moment... Melantha, was your suit breached? Yes, cut at the shoulder. Change into another one. Immediately. I think the counter-programming I'm doing will keep the lock sealed, but I can't take any chances.
Melantha was already running down the corridor toward the cargo hold where the suits and equipment were stored.
When you have changed,
Royd continued,
dump the corpses into the mass conversion unit. You'll find the appropriate hatch near the drive room, just to the left of the main lock. Convert any other loose objects that are not indispensable as well. Scientific instruments, books, tapes, tableware.
Knives? Suggested Melantha.
By all means.
Is Teak still a threat, Captain?
Mother is vastly weaker in a gravity field, Royd said. She has to fight it. Even boosted by the Nightflyers' power, she can only move one object at a time, and she has only a fraction of the lifting force she wields under weightless conditions. But the power is still there, remember. Also, it is possible she will find a way to circumvent me and cut out the gravity again. From here I can restore it in an instant, but I don't want any weapons lying around even for that brief period of time.
Melantha had reached the cargo area. She stripped off her vacuum suit and slipped into another one in record time. Then she gathered up the discarded suit and a double armful of instruments and dumped them into the conversion chamber. Afterwards, she turned her attention to the bodies. The man was no problem. The woman crawled down the hall after her as she pushed him through and thrashed weakly when it was her own turn, a grim reminder that the Nightflyers' powers were not all gone. Melantha easily overcame her feeble struggles and forced her through. The corpse of the xenobiologist was less trouble, but while she was cleaning out the lounge, a kitchen knife came spinning at her head. It came slowly, though, and Melantha just batted it aside, then picked it up and added it to the pile for conversion. She was working through the second cabin, carrying the Psy-Psych's abandoned drugs and injection gun under her arm, when she heard Royd cry out. A moment later, a force like a giant invisible hand wrapped itself around her chest and squeezed and pulled her, struggling, to the floor. Something was moving across the stars. Dimly and far off, de Brannon could see it, though he could not yet make out details. But it was there. That was unmistakable. Some vast shape that blocked off a section of the starscape. It was coming at them dead on. How he wished he had his team with him now. His telepath, his experts, his instruments. He pressed harder on the thrusters. Pinned to the floor, hurting, Melantha Jurl risked opening her suit's comm. She had to talk to Royd. "Are you there?" she asked. "What's happening?" The pressure was awful, and it was growing steadily worse. She could barely move. The answer was pained and slow in responding.
Outwitted me,
Royd's voice managed.
Hurts to talk.
Royd?
She teaked dial up 2 Gs, 3 higher, right here on the board. All I have to do, turn it back. Let me.
Silence. Then, finally, when Melantha was near despair, Royd's voice again. One word.
Can't.
Melantha's chest felt as if it were supporting 10 times her own weight. She could imagine the agony Royd must be in. Royd, for whom even one gravity was painful and dangerous. Even if the dial was an arm's length away, she knew his feeble musculature would never let him reach it.
Why?
She started, having somewhat less trouble talking than Royd.
Why would she turn up the gravity? It weakens her too, yes?
Yes, but in a time, hour, minute, my heart will burst, and then you alone, she will kill gravity, kill you.
Painfully, Melantha reached out her arm and dragged herself half a length down the corridor.
Royd, hold on. I'm coming.
She dragged herself forward again. The Psy-Psych's drug kit was still under her arm, impossibly heavy. She eased it down and started to shove it aside, then reconsidered. Instead, she opened its lid. The ampules were all neatly labeled. She glanced over them quickly, searching for adrenaline or synthestim, anything that might give her the strength she needed to reach Royd. She found several stimulants, selected the strongest, and was loading it into the injection gun with awkward, agonized slowness when her eyes chanced on the supply of Esperon. Melantha did not know why she hesitated. Esperon was only one of a half-dozen psionic drugs in the kit, but something about seeing it bothered her, reminded her of something she could not quite lay her finger on. She was trying to sort it out when she heard the noise.
Royd, she said, your mother, could she move? She couldn't move anything. Ticket, in this higher gravity, could she?
Maybe,
he answered.
if concentrate all her power. Hard. Maybe possible.
Why? Because
Melantha Gerald said grimly.
Because someone is cycling through the airlock.
The Volcran ship filled the universe.
It is not truly a ship, not as I thought it would be,
Caroli de Brannon was saying. His suit, Academy designed, had a built-in encoding device, and he was recording his comments for posterity, strangely secure in the certainty of his impending death.
The scale of it is difficult to imagine, difficult to estimate. Vast. I have nothing but my wrist computer, no instruments. I cannot make accurate measurements, but I would say, 100 kilometers, perhaps as much as 300 across. No solid mass, of course, not at all. It is delicate, airy, no ship as we know ships. It is old, beautiful. It is crystalline gossamer, alive with its own dim lights, a vast, intricate kind of spiderwebby craft. It reminds me a bit of the old star sail ships they used once, in the days before drive. But this great construct, it is not solid. It cannot be drive by light. It is no ship at all, really. It is all open to vacuum. It has no sealed cabins or life support spheres, none visible to me, unless blocked from my line of sight in some fashion. And no, I cannot believe that. It is too open, too fragile. It moves quite rapidly. I would wish for the instrumentation to measure its speed, but it is enough to be here. I am taking our sled at right angles to it to get clear of its path, but I cannot say that I will make it. It moves so much faster than we. Not at light speed, no, far below it, but still faster than the Nightflyer and its nuclear engines, I would guess. Only a guess. The Volcran craft has no visible means of propulsion. In fact, I wonder how... Perhaps it is a light sail, laser-launched millennia ago, now torn and rotted by some unimaginable catastrophe. But no, it is too symmetrical, too beautiful. The webbings, the great shimmering veils near the nexus, the beauty of it. I must describe it. I must be more accurate, I know. It is difficult. I grow too excited. It is large, as I have said, kilometers across, roughly, let me count, yes, roughly octagonal in shape. The nexus, the center, is a bright area, a small darkness surrounded by a much greater area of light, but only the dark portion seems entirely solid. The lighted areas are translucent. I can see stars through them, discolored, shifted towards the purple. Veils, I call those the veils. From the nexus and the veils, 8 long, vastly long, spurs project, not quite spaced evenly, so it is not a true geometric octagon. Aha, I see better now. One of the spurs is shifted. Very slowly the veils are rippling. They are mobile then, those projections, and the webbing runs from one spur to the next, around and around, but there are patterns, odd patterns. It is not at all the simple webbing of a spider. I cannot quite see order in the patterns, in the traceries of the webs, but I feel sure that the order is there. The meaning is waiting to be found. There are lights. Have I mentioned the lights? The lights are the brightest around the center nexus, but they are nowhere very bright. A dim violet.
Some visible radiation then, but not much. I would like to take an ultraviolet reading of this craft, but I do not have the instrumentation. The lights move. The veils seem to ripple, and the lights run constantly up and down the length of the spurs at differing rates of speed. And sometimes other lights can be seen traversing the webbing, moving across the patterns. I do not know what the lights are or whether they emanate from inside the craft or outside. The Volcran myths. This is really not much like the legends. Not truly. Though as I think now, I recall a Nor Toulouse report that the Volcran ships were impossibly large, but I took that for exaggeration. And lights. The Volcran have often been linked to lights, but those reports were so vague they might have meant anything, described anything from a laser propulsion system to simple exterior lighting. I could not know it meant this. Ah, what mysteries. The ship is still too far away for me to see the finer detail. I think perhaps the darker area in the center is a craft, a life capsule. The Volcran must be inside it. I wish my team was with me, my telepath. He was a Class 1. We might have made contact, might have communicated with them. The things we would learn, the things they have seen. To think how old this craft is, how ancient this race, how long they have been outbound. It fills me with awe. Communication would be such a gift, such an impossible gift, but they are so alien.
Brannon,
the Psy-Psych said in a low, urgent voice.
can't you feel?
Caroli de Brannon looked at his companion as if seeing her for the first time.
Can you feel them? You are a 3. Can you sense them now strongly?
Long ago,
the Psy-Psych said.
Long ago. Can you project? Talk to them? Where are they? In the center area?
Yes,
she replied, and she laughed. Her laugh was shrill and hysterical, and de Brannon had to recall that she was a very sick woman.
Yes, in the center, de Brannon. That's where the pulses come from. Only you're wrong about them. It's not a them at all. Your legends are all lies. Lies. I wouldn't be surprised if we were the first to ever see your Volcran, to ever come this close. The others, those aliens of yours, they merely felt, deep and distantly, sensed a bit of the nature of the Volcran in their dreams and visions, and fashioned the rest to suit themselves. Ships and wars, and a race of eternal travelers. It is all...
What do you mean, my friend?
Caroli said, baffled.
You do not make sense. I do not understand.
No,
the Psy-Psych said, her voice suddenly gentle.
you do not, do you? You cannot feel it as I can. So clear now. This must be how a one feels all the time. A one full of Esperon.
What do you feel? What?
It's not a them, Caroli,
the Psy-Psych said.
it's an it. Alive, Caroli, and quite mindless, I assure you.
Mindless?
de Brannon said.
No, you must be wrong. You are not reading correctly. I will accept that it is a single creature if you say so. A single great marvelous star traveler. But how can it be mindless? You sensed it, its mind, its telepathic emanations. You and the whole of the Cray sensitives and all the others. Perhaps its thoughts are too alien for you to read.
Perhaps,
the Psy-Psych admitted.
but what I do read is not so terribly alien at all. Only animal. Its thoughts are slow and dark and strange. Hardly thoughts at all. Faint. The brain must be huge, I grant you that, but it can't be devoted to conscious thought.
What do you mean?
The propulsion system, de Brannon. Don't you feel the pulses? They are threatening to rip off the top of my skull. Can't you guess what is driving your damned Volcran across the galaxy? Why they avoid gravity wells? Can't you guess how it is moving?
No,
de Brannon said. But even as he denied it, a dawn of comprehension broke across his face, and he looked away from his companion, back at the swelling immensity of the Volcran, its lights moving, its veils a ripple, as it came on and on, across light years, light centuries, across eons. When he looked back at her, he mouthed only a single word.
Teak,
he said. Silence filled their world. She nodded. Melantha Jurl struggled to lift the injection gun and press it against an artery. It gave a single loud hiss, and the drug flooded her system. She lay back and gathered her strength, tried to think. Esperon. Esperon. Why was that important? It had killed the telepath, made him a victim of his own abilities, tripled his power and his vulnerability. Psi. It all came back to Psi. The inner door of the airlock opened. The headless corpse came through. It moved with jerks, unnatural shufflings, never lifting its legs from the floor. It sagged as it moved, half crushed by the weight upon it. Each shuffle was crude and sudden. Some grim force was literally yanking one leg forward, then the next. It moved in slow motion, arms stiff by its sides. But it moved. Melantha summoned her own reserves and began to crawl away from it, never taking her eyes off its advance. Her thoughts went round and round, searching for the piece out of place, the solution to the chess problem, finding nothing. The corpse was moving faster than she was. Clearly, visibly, it was gaining. Melantha tried to stand. She got to her knees, her heart pounding. Then one knee. She tried to force herself up, to lift the impossible burden on her shoulders. She was strong, she told herself. She was the improved model. But when she put all her weight on one leg, her muscles would not hold her. She collapsed awkwardly, and when she smashed against the floor, it was as if she had fallen from a building. She heard a sharp snap, and a stab of agony flashed up the arm she had tried to use to break her fall. She blinked back tears and choked on her own scream. The corpse was halfway up the corridor. It must be walking on two broken legs, she realized. It didn't care.
Melantha, heard you? Are you... Melantha?
Quiet, she snapped at Royd. She had no breath to waste on talk. Now she had only one arm. She used the discipline she had taught herself, willed away the pain. She kicked feebly, her boots scraping for purchase, and she pulled herself forward with her good arm. The corpse came on and on. She dragged herself across the threshold of the lounge, worming her way into the crushed sled, hoping it would delay the cadaver. It was a meter behind her. In the darkness, in the lounge, there, where it had all begun, Melantha Jurl ran out of strength. Her body shuddered and she collapsed on the damp carpet, and she knew that she could go no further. On the far side of the door, the corpse stood stiffly. The sled began to shake. Then, with the scrape of metal against metal, it slid backwards, moving in tiny sudden increments, jerking itself free and out of the way. Sigh. Melantha wanted to curse it and cry. Vainly she wished for a psi power of her own, a weapon to blast apart the teak-driven corpse that stalked her. She was improved, she thought angrily, but not improved enough. Her parents had given her all the genetic gifts they could arrange, but psi was beyond them. The gene was astronomically rare, recessive, and suddenly it came to her. "Royd!" she yelled, put all of her remaining will into her words. "The dial! Take it! Royd, take it!" His reply was very faint, troubled.
Can't. I don't. Mother. Only her. Not me. No.
Not mother, she said, desperate. You always say mother. I forgot. Not your mother. Listen, you're a clone. Same genes. You have it too. The power.
Don't,
he said.
Never. Must be sex-linked.
No, it isn't. I know. Promethean, Royd. Don't tell a Promethean about genes. Turn it.
The sled jumped a third of a meter and listed to the side. A path was clear. The corpse came forward.
Trying?
Royd said.
Nothing. I can't.
She cured you,
Melantha said bitterly.
Better than she was cured. Prenatal. But it's only suppressed. You can.
I don't know how.
The corpse now stood above her, stopped. Pale-fleshed hands trembled spastically, began to rise. Melantha swore and wept and made a futile fist. And all at once, the gravity was gone. Far, far away, she heard Royd cry out and then fall silent. The corpse bobbed awkwardly into the air, its hands hanging limply before it. Melantha, reeling in the weightlessness, tried to ready herself for its furious assault. But the body did not move again. It floated, dead and still. Melantha moved to it, pushed it, and it sailed across the room.
Royd?
She said uncertainly. There was no answer. She pulled herself through the hole into the control chamber and found Royd Eris, master of the Nightflyer, prone on his back in his armored suit, dead. His heart had given out. But the dial on the gravity grid was set at 0. I have held the Nightflyer's crystalline soul within my hands. It is deep and red and multifaceted, large as my head and icy to the touch. In its scarlet depths, 2 small sparks of light burned fiercely and sometimes seemed to whirl. I have crawled through the consoles, wound my way carefully past safeguards and cybernets, taking care to damage nothing. And I have laid rough hands on that great crystal, knowing that is where she lives. And I cannot bring myself to wipe it. Royd's ghost has asked me not to. Last night we talked about it once again, over brandy and chess in the lounge. Royd cannot drink, of course, but he sends his specter to smile at me, and he tells me where he wants his pieces moved. For the 1000th time he offered to take me back to Avalon, or any world of my choice, if only I would go outside and complete the repairs we abandoned so many years ago, so that the Nightflyer might safely slip into Stardrive. For the 1000th time, I refused. He is stronger now, no doubt. Their genes are the same, after all. Their power is the same. Dying, he too found the strength to impress himself upon the great crystal. The ship is alive with both of them, and frequently they fight. Sometimes she outwits him for a moment, and the Nightflyer does odd, erratic things. The gravity goes up or down, or off completely. Blankets wrap themselves around my throat while I sleep. Objects come hurtling out of dark corners. Those times have come less frequently of late, though. When they do come, Royd stops her, or I do. Together, the Nightflyer is ours. Royd claims he is strong enough alone, that he does not really need me, that he can keep her under check. I wonder. Over the chessboard, I still beat him 9 games out of 10. And there are other considerations. Our work, for one. Caroli would be proud of us. The Fulcran will soon enter the mists of the Tempter's Veil, and we follow close behind. Studying, recording, doing all that old de Brannon would have wanted us to do. It is all in the computer. It is also on tape and on paper, should the computer ever be wiped. It will be interesting to see how the Fulcran thrives in the Veil. Matter is so thick there compared to the thin diet of interstellar hydrogen on which the creature is fed for endless eons. We have tried to communicate with it, with no success. I do not believe it is sentient at all. And lately, Royd has tried to imitate its ways, gathering all his energies in an attempt to move the Nightflyer by teak. Sometimes, oddly, his mother even joins him in those efforts. So far they have failed, but we will keep trying. So the work goes on. And it is important work, though not the field I trained for back on Avalon. We know that our results will reach humanity. Royd and I have discussed it. Before I die, I will destroy the central crystal and clear the computers. And afterwards, I will set course manually for the close vicinity of an inhabited world. I know I can do it. I have all the time I need, and I am an improved model. I will not consider the other option, though it means much to me that Royd suggests it again and again. No doubt I could finish the repairs. Perhaps Royd could control the ship without me and continue the work, but that is not important. When I finally touched him, for the first and last and only time, his body was still warm. But he was gone already. He never felt my touch. I could not keep that promise, but I can keep my other. I will not leave him alone with her, ever.